Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It's Monday, and that means it's time to talk some recruiting. My name is Brian Driscoll. I'm the publisher at Irish Breakdown. That guy right there, Ryan Roberts, our director of recruiting. Ryan, we have a jam-packed show today of recruiting. But before we begin, I do have a favor I want to ask all of you in the chat if you're listening live. I put a link to a YouTube channel in the chat down there. We are launching a new college football channel through Irish Breakdown. It is going to be a separate channel, and so we have to build up a subscriber base and the watch hours. So if you are a fan who likes listening to topics about other teams, we've already contracted one person to do a weekly show. I'm not going to get into it yet till all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed. I think you all will be excited about them in negotiations with bringing on a couple other people. We will do some stuff to populate that channel, but I'm looking to expand the Irish Breakdown coverage to where we bring people on to cover other teams and to talk about college football at large. Of course, we'll have some stuff where occasionally we do it, but we are going to still stick to, as much as we can, Notre Dame. Right. And so this isn't about us spreading ourselves super thin and doing all this college football stuff. There will be some of that, but that's stuff that we were already planning on doing that we'll just put over there now instead of putting it here. So that way we stick to Notre Dame as much as we can on this channel. So I didn't want to populate a Notre Dame channel with a bunch of college football stuff. So if that intrigues you, subscribe. If that doesn't intrigue you, I'd still ask that you subscribe as a favor. So that way we can get that thing up to 1,000 subscribers and 4,000 watch hours, which we'll get to once we start putting some content on there so that we can monetize it. And so we can make some money to hire better people and continue to grow and grow and grow. Something I'm very, very, very excited about. So if you could do us that favor, we would greatly, greatly appreciate it. We put something up on the message board on, I think, Friday, and we're already over 500 subscribers. So, we need to get to 1,000 and then, of course, continue to grow beyond it on that. Now, that's the plug for that. And the graphics are just kind of placeholder graphics. We're getting some new, fresh graphics made once we launch the channel. So let's get to some recruiting news here, Ryan. Mm-hmm. And the first bit of news we want to get to today, we're going to talk about Austin Novosad, the 2023 quarterback who's visiting this week. So it's a huge, huge deal. He's visiting tomorrow. We're talking about Ben Minich, 2023 kid who's also visiting tomorrow. We will talk about just kind of some of the 2024 names to know. They're going to also be on campus this week. And then after that, we are going to break down the film of Jeremiyah Love. And we have talked about him a lot, but we've never sat down and just said, hey, here's a film breakdown of him with Ryan and I together. So we're going to do that. And then, of course, at the end, mailbag. So if you have questions, start throwing those suckers in right now, and we'll get to those when we're at the end. So, Ryan, let's begin with another update on Austin Novosad. We talked last week about the fact that we did expect him to visit this week. We first noted that this was something that we expected to happen about 3 weeks ago. It's been finalized. Austin Novosad will be on campus tomorrow. What's the latest?
Yeah, so we have, like you said, we've anticipated this for a little bit, right, Brian? I think that the biggest thing here is that everyone wants to know what the status of him and if this visit to Notre Dame is the final step towards a potential flip from Baylor, because he is obviously currently committed to the Bears. But to our understanding, and I just talked to someone this morning that is close to Austin, their plans are kind of forecasted are he'll be at Notre Dame tomorrow. They also want to get back to Baylor sometime this week, and then potentially also get out to Texas A&M. That's kind of the schedule that they're planning for this final week here in July. I think for me, it's an interesting one because we've talked about, do they come the day of the barbecue tomorrow where there's going to be a lot of other prospects on or other recruits on campus? Do they come on a different day when it's just more of a one-on-one situation or a little bit more of a secluded type of environment? And he is coming for the barbecue. And the barbecue, obviously, we're going to talk a lot about the different players that are scheduled to come. I think there's some merit for a potential recruit to be around other prominent recruits in the class, both committed and uncommitted. But for him, he's only going to be one of the only two 2023 recruits that are expected to be on campus with Ben Minich, right? So it's not like there's going to be other 2023 recruits that are going to be around to help recruit him, which makes it a little bit of an interesting conversation.
I believe, and I'm trying to get confirmation on this, but somebody I talked to today said the Jaden Greathouse might be coming up tomorrow.
Wow, that would be big
So
time.
we'll follow up with him and try to get that confirmed, but that's something I was told this afternoon. And Braylon James was going to try to come, but there was a family thing that kind of came up, and it was planned so late. But I won't be surprised if some commits, 23 commits show up. It just won't be a lot like there was in June when those big visits.
Well, I'll say this: if one or two of the Texas wide receivers come out, then that's big time, man. That's a big time strategy. Let's call it what it is for Notre Dame, right? So this is something where this is a huge step in this process. Does this mean that this is Notre Dame's to lose? No, that's not what this means. What this means, though, is that they're in the game now, right? Getting him on campus is a massive step. Getting him around the coaches, around the offensive staff, around Coach Reese, around Coach Freeman, because until now, they've been a voice over a telephone. And now it tangibly becomes a real recruiting opportunity for Notre Dame to get him in South Bend tomorrow for the barbecue.
I do want to talk about kind of where things stand with him, because Brian, when I look at Novosad, this has been such an interesting recruitment really from the beginning, because you've got a kid that you get in on late. He's committed to Baylor. Ohio State gets in on him. They make a run. It looks like everybody thinks he's going to go to Ohio State. Then he backs off. Texas A&M makes a run. Everybody thinks he's going to go to Texas A&M because his parents both went there. And I don't believe that to be accurate. There's been this assumption that he's definitely not going to commit to Baylor. That is something I actually want to, first of all, push back on. It's not a given that he's not going to go to Baylor. I think Baylor's still very much a player in this. I talked to a source today that said actually he thinks that he thinks Notre Dame and Baylor are probably in the best position right now if the visit goes well. And that's why I think this visit is so important. Because I really feel like Notre Dame has been able to make up a ton of ground without having been able to get with him the kind of things that other schools that have. He's been to A&M multiple times. He's been to Ohio State twice. And Notre Dame has been able to gain this much ground without ever having him on campus. That's a great sign. So this visit is incredibly important. And I think that by the time the week is over, we're going to have a pretty good idea which way he is leaning. Where coming out of this visit, it's going to be, it went great, we think we're a major player, or it went okay, but I'm not sure if we close the deal. I think if one of those two things we're going to hear, I have a feeling we're going to hear the latter. I think things are going to go very well. I think everything I know about Austin, high academic kid, very religious kid, I think are two things that attract him about Notre Dame. I get the sense with where he's from and some other things I've been told. I think the idea of a smaller school intrigues him, which I think helps Baylor and of course helps Notre Dame. And of course, Baylor is a school that is a private school. It's built around the Baptist Foundation. Notre Dame is obviously a Catholic school, although you don't have to be Catholic to go to Notre Dame, which we've talked about before. So I want to I actually think that we can't know, and I'm not in prediction mode until the kid is visited, because you never know until a visit happens.
You're not submitting your crystal ball yet?
No, I'll never be doing that. But I do think Notre Dame is much more of a player in this than I think some people think. And that is going into the visit. So I think Notre Dame is in a better position with Novosad going into the visit. And I think the fact that he is making the visit is why I think that. Because from my understanding, the visit wasn't even a guarantee. There were certain things he wanted to know from Notre Dame, and there were certain relationship building that needed to happen. There were certain things Notre Dame needed to be confident in before they even offered. And if Notre Dame didn't hear the right things, they weren't even going to offer. They wanted to make sure that he was going to give them a legitimate look. And then there were some things where he wasn't going to give them a legitimate look until he heard certain things. And I'm not talking about promises. I'm just talking about, hey, what's your vision of me, right? If you're Austin Novosad, you're like, okay, am I just a placeholder for CJ Carr? Or are you looking at me as a guy to come in and compete and say, we're going to give you every chance that we're going to give Steve Angeli, that we would have given Dante Moore, and that we're going to give CJ Carr? Those are some very important questions that Austin Novosad needed answered. And I think the fact that he's coming on campus says that he liked what he heard, and so did Notre Dame, which I think puts Notre Dame in a very unique position where I actually feel a lot better about them going into this visit now that it's locked in than I did a week ago. And based on some of the things I've heard. So I actually think Notre Dame could close this out. Now, that's not me giving away intel. That part's my opinion. That last part's my opinion. That I think, based on everything I've heard, if this goes well, I could see Notre Dame being tough to beat on this one. My opinion.
Yep.
The intel we've gotten is just that he likes Notre Dame, they like him, but other schools are players, right? That's really the only intel I've got. And Notre Dame knows they got to knock this one out of the park. Everything I've been told about Austin Novosad, I feel like they will. And we can't discount the relationship with, as you mentioned, the two Texas receivers that are in the class. Braylon James and Jaden Greathouse is going to play a big, big role in if he picks Notre Dame, you can kind of you can give an assist to Jaden Greathouse and Braylon James, in my opinion.
You can give him a sticker, right? Put a sticker on their paper, be like, you did a great job, man. Great job there. I agree completely. And I also like that you didn't discount Brian and the Baylor relationship too, right? Like this is not I don't think this is a foregone conclusion that it is Notre Dame, Texas A&M, or Ohio State, right? Like I don't think that, and I mentioned that in this week's mailbag where I said that I think that Baylor is going to have they're going to have a play here, right? Because they have been developing that relationship for a long time. There's been no question who Baylor's number one quarterback has been, right? Like that's their guy. That's been their guy, right? So you can't, because I mean, like let's call it what it is, right? Notre Dame has turned to Austin Novosad because they missed on their guy, right? Their guy in this class. Baylor has always had their guy, and that's always been Austin. So I don't think we can undersell that relationship part of it, right? So the fact that he is going to get back to Baylor again this week tells me that they're going to get a legitimate chance here. Like it's not a foregone conclusion that is a flippable option here. But getting a player like him up to Notre Dame, up to South Bend, we talk about it all the time. The minute that they get a player on campus, things get real quick.
You
right?
know,
like
pretty quick.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And I also put in the mailbag, and you mentioned it already, so I'll just kind of reiterate it again. We'll know very quickly what Notre Dame's stance in this one is, right? Like it'll only be the end of this week. We'll kind of have like a pretty good indication on what Notre Dame's legitimate chances are for Austin Novosad. So it's a big opportunity for him tomorrow. I have confidence in the staff that they're going to put their best foot forward. It's not a foregone conclusion that he ends at Notre Dame, but it is obviously a massive step to get him on campus.
So in the end of the day, we're not offering predictions because we would be irresponsible to do that until he gets on campus. But I do want to say, Ryan, I think you pointed out, that's the reason he hasn't decommitted from Baylor. And here's another question. People have said, hey, why is Notre Dame letting this kid visit if he hasn't decommitted from Baylor? That stance is only true for official visits. This is not an official visit. This is an unofficial visit.
I think is also a big step, right? Because on their own dime, they decide we're going to go take a look at Notre Dame. I think that's huge. I think that's huge. There's obviously legitimate interest to make that visit and to make it on your own accord.
Yeah, I think the other player here was Ohio State for a long time. And the spin was he's not visiting Ohio State. He's already been there twice. I don't buy that based on the people I've talked to. I think it's because Ohio State's not the player they were. I could be wrong on that. I'm just telling you what I've been told. I think if he was really in decision-making mode and really wanted to see all his finalists again before he made a decision, I got to think they would find a way to make the 4-hour drive from South Bend to Columbus, Ohio, since they're already in this part of the country. I have a hard time believing that. So I don't think Ohio State is the player that they were before. I think A&M is a player, but I think Baylor is also a much bigger threat in this than people think. But I do like where Notre Dame stands going into this visit, and we'll report on where they are coming out, obviously. But like where they are going in.
We've talked a lot about Texas recruiting continuously, right? The fact that Notre Dame has killed it in Texas, I think, is why that interest may have shifted from Ohio State to Notre Dame a little bit, right? The fact that he knows Jaden Greathouse. He has a relationship with Braylon James. That's well documented, but it's the fact that if Austin Novosad is in Notre Dame's class, he's the 5th commit out of the state of Texas. Don't lose sight of that, folks. The fact that Notre Dame has made it a priority to get into Texas this cycle. And I think that that's very appealing for a guy like Austin, a kid like Austin Novosad, who, has relationships with those types of kids.
And of course, we love the idea of Notre Dame getting more involved with Texas. That's always a plus. All right, so let's move on, Ryan, to the next topic. And that is Ben Minich. And we talked a lot about him last week, but we're just going to kind of give our latest thoughts on him. He is going to be on campus tomorrow as well. And this is a kid to keep an eye on, because obviously he is a kid that he has some good offers. Like Oklahoma's offered him. I don't believe that's a school that's still actively recruiting him. I could be incorrect on that, but that's just my understanding of the situation. Mm-hmm. I do like where Notre Dame is coming into this visit. Obviously, he's been on campus before. He camped at Notre Dame this summer. I think the fact that he visited this summer without an offer to work out for the staff, I think speaks volumes about this kid's opinion of Notre Dame. You're not trying to earn an offer from Notre Dame if you don't like a lot about what Notre Dame has offered. And in many, many instances, the kids that have done that end up in the class. So we'll see if that happens or not. But obviously getting Ben Minich on campus this week is big. And I want to just kind of go over where things stand with him, Ryan. Yeah. And also to remind people that this does hear me now, folks. This doesn't have anything to do with Peyton Bowen. Okay. There will be spin about that because people like to say things to get clicks. This is not about Peyton Bowen. This is about Caleb Downs. And the fact that they won the third safety and they made their run, they gave their shot to Caleb Downs. Now, what happens if Caleb Downs decides in 2 days he wants to come to Notre Dame? Then you take them both. You will always make room for Caleb Downs. But again, I could see Ben Minich maybe making a decision today, but the impression I got is that maybe it could, he'll want to go think about it and do all that kind of stuff anyway. So what is the latest, Ryan, with Ben Minich? 2023 safety from Ohio, Lakota West, Ben Minich.
Well, I think first and foremost, he does have a committable offer from Notre Dame, right? Like this staff likes him. The staff wants him to be a part of the 2023 recruiting class. I think that's a big step. Obviously, he's out of Lakota West in Ohio. And I mean, from everything I've heard, Brian, from talking to Ben, talking to a couple people closer to Ben, I think as long as this goes well, because he's been to campus before, which is obviously why Notre Dame has interest in him, because they saw him work out in person. If this goes well tomorrow, I think that Notre Dame is going to be very difficult to beat. I'll just leave it like that, right? Like I think that they are his favorites right now going into the visit, and I think that Notre Dame has a chance to lock it up if they do really well. Like, let's call it what it is. This is a kid that Notre Dame likes. He reciprocates that interest. If they knock it out of the park, I already think that they're the favorites for Ben. And if they do great, I wouldn't be surprised if it is a commitment in the near future, because I think that all signs and all momentum is shifting towards that right now.
Here's a comment that we had from Tyler Binge. Said, Brian, what would you do if Downs tricks everyone and comes back to Notre Dame, or comes to Notre Dame? What I would do? I would probably lose my voice screaming and probably have some neighbors calling the cops on me because of the loud screaming that I would be doing in my home. And I'd probably yell, "Let's go," really loudly about 100 times until I couldn't talk anymore. So I may not.
That's the fan side of Brian Driscoll.
There's no doubt. There's no doubt. Like that's because here's the reality of it. When they land other big time players, it's kind of like, okay, this is a great pickup. You get excited about it, but you don't have that reaction. But like, I've convinced myself because of all the intel we have that they're not getting Caleb Downs. So I'm not even thinking about it. So like,
sure,
if he all of a sudden on the 27th tweets out he's going to Notre Dame, I mean, it would be huge. It would be a tidal wave. I mean, forget that. Okay, that's my fan reaction to a recruiting. It'd be a tidal wave. I think it would shock the college football recruiting world. I really do, because no one expects it. There's no doubt. Okay. There's no doubt. But yes, somebody said on-air dance, Brian, on-air dance. I almost made a commitment to that, but no. You will see me show emotion on air if he did that. But again, I'm not too concerned about that because I don't see that happening.
Mhm.
But I did want to respond to that question. But again, this is a response to Caleb Downs. I also want to remind people that there's been a lot of talk. Well, 3-star kid. Look, the fact is whatever we think about him, and we gave you our honest opinion. Nice player, Purdue, Indiana kind of kid. We don't see Notre Dame kind of kid. I would encourage everyone to kind of also take the same stance. That everyone that believes that or worse, I would encourage you all to take the similar stance that we're doing, which is have an open mind for the kid's senior film. Let that play out. Because whatever he did on campus this summer impressed the Notre Dame staff a lot, to the point where they didn't look at other guys that we know would be interested. There are guys, especially in the Midwest, that we know right now that are much higher ranked than Ben Minich, that Ryan and I know right now that if Notre Dame called, they'd be all about that, including some kids committed to other schools. Notre Dame has targeted this kid because they like this kid and they think he fits what they're trying to build in this staff. So I just wanted to say that. I also remind people that this does anything to do with Peyton. I know that's like people are going to use the Peyton Bowen thing until he just comes out and says, "Hey, look, I'm not looking around anymore," right? Or his brother commits somewhere else, and then it's all over with. That people are going to use him as a way to get clicks. We know that, right? And we're going to have to keep answering the question, but that's kind of where we're at with that. So wanted to update everybody on that. So Ryan, got some 2024 kids coming on campus this weekend. So
got a couple.
Not just the 20, the couple 23 kids. Notre Dame's all 5 Notre Dame commits in the 2024 class are expected to be on campus this weekend. I think that dynamic is very interesting when you consider that CJ Carr will be on campus this weekend, this week, the same time as Austin Novosad, which is very interesting, and could be really good or bad depending on how it goes. But that's something to watch. Cam Williams, Jack Larson, Brandon Davis Swain, Owen Wafel will also be on campus this weekend. But there's some other big name guys on campus this weekend that I want to kind of just bring up and have you just sort of give the latest. And then we'll kind of talk about, why this is a top target for Notre Dame and why it's important that they get this kid or that they be a player this one. And I'm going to start off with the biggest guy on the board. And I mean that literally. Let's talk Justin Scott, who is the 2024 defensive tackle from St. Ignatius in Chicago. I believe he is still ranked as the number 3 overall player in the country. Yes, he is the number 3 overall player in the country. According to On3, he is ranked number 12 nationally by Rivals. And 247 is just wrong in their ranking of him. But he is a top 10 to 15 caliber prospect, Ryan. He will be back on campus for, I believe this will be his 3rd trip to Notre Dame. So getting him back is going to be huge before he goes into his junior season.
Yeah, I mean, Brian, he has everything that you look for in a defensive tackle. I mean, you mentioned 6'5", 310. He looks skinny right now, and he may have played probably closer to 300, but the fact of the matter is that he has an incredible frame. He's a really athletic kid. And we know that, I mean, he's right there in Illinois, right? So, like, he's in Notre Dame's backyard. We talk about the home base thing, right? Surrounding states there. I mean, Justin Scott is a really impressive football player that we know Notre Dame has interest in. And if they are going to make a push at it, I feel like there is a lot of mutual interest between both parties. So I'm not telling everyone to get on commit watch. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying, though, is that there is legitimate interest on both sides here. And if Notre Dame makes that push for him, I think that Justin Scott is very, very high on where Notre Dame is and what the future of them holds. And Cam Williams, I know, is a kid that has been on Justin since he committed because they're both Illinois kids, right? So I think that this is a big moment for a Justin Scott, because I think that there is, I mean, I would consider Notre Dame the favorite as of now, but I think if Notre Dame really makes the push tomorrow, as we're recording the show, I think that this one could be something where it starts to trend in Notre Dame's favor very, very quickly with Justin Scott. That's
going to be the interesting thing for me is will Notre Dame push for him? Right. Because I don't know if they will. In regard, when I mean push, and what Ryan is saying push is push for a commitment, because that can be perceived in 2 ways. And I want to make sure we're very clear on this. Some people say, well, push is in like, well, do you not want him? Why would you not push for him? That's not the context we're referring to here. We're referring to here simply, you love them, you want them? Are you going to try to, I don't want to say coerce, because that can, but it's sort of like, hey, we really want you to do it now.
Close the deal.
Right. I don't think they're going to push for that. What I do think they're going to do is really give a big sales pitch on why it's the place for him, and then hope that that is something that causes him to speed up his process, because we've seen this before, right? Because my first response, if I'm listening to the channel and I've listened to other things that Irish Breakdown has reported, including things that you have reported and Sean has reported, like, wait a minute, hold on. Isn't this kid saying he wants to wait till after his junior year, or at least into his junior year? Yes, that is true. And just like Jaden Alsbury said, he was going to wait until December, right? I mean, just like Dante Moore was telling people a while ago that he was going to wait till the fall. I mean, kids change their time. Jaden Greathouse is going to write. Right. When you know. And I think that's the thing is, and that's what we're saying is not that we think Justin Scott is coming into this visit thinking, okay, I'm going to commit tomorrow. I don't believe that to be the case. That's not what we're saying. It's more about sometimes you just know. And as we said about Jaden Greathouse, Ryan reported what Jaden said about going into the fall. But what did I say? What did Ryan also agree with and say as well? Because there's a difference between we're reporting what the news is and then we're giving our opinion. The news is Justin Scott wants to wait until the fall at the very earliest to make a decision. What we also know, having done this a long time, is that sometimes kids just know, and they say, you know what, it's time. And could Justin be one of those guys? I think it's possible. I do. I think it's possible. And I could also see him waiting until he comes back for another game in the fall and maybe doing something then. But we know he loves Notre Dame. We think Notre Dame is in a great position there. It's just about, like you said, can you close the deal? And I think that's a big question. And I'll tell you what, if they could, that would be huge
literally
for Notre Dame. So yes, that would be that would be a big one, figuratively and literally. So I want to stick with the big boys a little bit more. There's two other big boys that I want to talk about. They're going to be on campus this weekend. First of all, I love the fact that Brandon Davis Swain is back on campus again for another visit. But there's two offensive linemen on campus this weekend, and they come in with completely different sort of situations. One is Peter Jones, who has been offered by Notre Dame and is a kid that we think Notre Dame's a good place for. And Ryan will give kind of the latest because you just had an update on Peter. You talked to Peter last week. We had a story at irishbreakdown.com. The other's Ian Moore, another player that Ryan had an update on. And so we'll talk about those two guys next, Ryan. But I want to first start with Peter Jones because he is someone that does have an offer.
Yeah, he's out of Malvern Prep out there in Pennsylvania. He's a player that has been on the board for Notre Dame for a pretty long time now. And we know that there is legitimate interest from Peter Jones. I spoke to him recently, like Brian said. He is continued to reiterate that he wants to wait until after his junior year to make a commitment. So I think that, and he does strike me as a player. I know Brian was just talking about, things change pretty quickly, right? Mm-hmm. But I do think Peter Jones is one of those players that if there was a player that I've heard that for in 2024 that I legitimately do believe him 100%, it would be Peter Jones. I do think that this one is going to play out a little bit. And I mean, when I'm saying play out, I'm talking about like it might go into the summer of his junior year, right? So like it's not like you have to wait a crazy
And I'm not sure
amount of time.
Notre Dame is going to be pushing for any offensive linemen just yet. I think they're going to let the board I think they want to see all these linemen just as much as these linemen want to see more of Notre Dame in this instance, because the numbers are going to be smaller and you want to make sure that you're taking some guys. And so like you said, it's also, I mean, he's from Malvern, Pennsylvania, which is a little bit further away than Chicago.
Yep.
So, I mean, it's just, it's a different scenario, but I do think you're correct. It doesn't sound like there's any thought on either end of making this happen right away. Now, do I think that if he decided this weekend he wanted to come, would Notre Dame say yes? I believe so, absolutely. Mm-hmm. It's there's a difference between saying, would you take a kid's commitment, and are you pushing a kid to commit now?
Right.
Sometimes like, and this is part of recruiting, is sometimes like, you know what, I think that kid's on the verge, and I think if we push, we can get him to kind of, then you got to say, look, this kid is not anywhere close, and he doesn't respond well when we talk to him about time frames. So us pushing for him to commit could hurt us. That's part of reading the room a little bit. And I think Notre Dame's, for the most part, Notre Dame's done a pretty good job of that. I think, with 23 and 24 commits, is knowing who you can push into commit category and
Right.
knowing who you can't. And that's, I think, why they have the 5 that they have in the class right now. And
Agreed.
some of them they didn't necessarily push, like Brandon Davis Swain. I don't think they were pushing for him to decide. I don't think they thought he was in decision-making mode. He just was like, yeah, I'm ready. And it was a huge pickup for Notre Dame. Let's talk
It
about Ian
was.
Moore, Ryan, because he's a completely different situation. And what's interesting is Ian Moore is one of the – he has not been offered yet by Notre Dame. He is an in-state kid, from New Palestine in Indiana, 6'6", 295 pounds, ranked as a top 100 recruit by both 247 and Rivals, who rank him 89th and 81st respectively. He's 185th by ESPN, 233 by On3, so his lowest ranking is 233. He's ranked as the second or third best player in the state of Indiana, yet he doesn't have a Notre Dame offer. So what's the latest with him? First of all, explain why he doesn't have a Notre Dame offer, because I think the context of that, it backs up what I just said about them pushing for O-line commits right now.
Sure.
And them not offering doesn't mean that they don't like him a lot. So explain the context of that, and then kind of talk about the latest that you learned about this visit, because you did interview Peter or Ian the other day about this visit. He certainly wants an offer. There's no doubt about that.
Yes, yeah, I've had the privilege of talking to Ian a couple times at this point, and he is a player, like you said, Brian. He really wants an offer. Without telling me directly, I have a very good inkling that Notre Dame's kind of a dream offer for him. Like I see that with this type of situation, and with that scenario, the interesting back and forth is, I think if Ian Moore had an offer, he would almost, I don't want to say instantly, but very shortly after will probably be in the Notre Dame class if they chose to have him. So I think the balancing act is, we like you, but we want to make sure that you're our guy, right? And we want to see you in person. So I think seeing him again, being able to just kind of eye test, put him through the ringer, that type of thing, like as far as, is he a legitimate good fit? And if we do decide to offer him, we have to understand that he's probably going to commit relatively soon, I think, just kind of based upon everything that I've talked to Ian Moore. So I think he's a good player on film, but there are some other really talented players that are already on the offer list right now. There's only 4 guys, but then there's a bunch of questions as far as, when's the board expanding? Who are those players going to be? I think in offensive lineman recruiting, like Brian said before, is still working itself out a little bit right now. So I don't think you're in a rush for Ian, because you know that he likes you.
Well,
you like him,
yeah,
but you want to make sure you love him, right? Like that, I think, is the question.
You have to be careful with in-state kids, because you don't want to offer a kid and then say, hey, you can't commit right now. And now that happens, right? It happens in recruiting, but sometimes a kid, if you offer him, he's going to want to commit. And so you got to be honest. Look, here's where we're at. Why did we offer these kids? Because we know they're not in commit mode. We know that Peter Jones and Gearby Lambert and Kyle Altuna and Josiah Thompson are not in commit now mode. We have told them nothing different than we've told you. We like you. We're trying to get to know you better. We want to see, this. We want to see that. We're in the same boat with those guys we are with you. But, this is kind of where we're at, right? And so, because I do think they know what I think you and I both believe to be true, which is, if you offered Ian Moore tomorrow, his recruitment will be over sooner rather than later. And you need to make sure if you know that, then you've got to, but you're not ready to take an offensive lineman per se, or him per se, then you need to make sure that's communicated. And so you talk about who's on commit watch. I mean, he's the one kid I would say, if he gets offered tomorrow, would be a kid that I would say, you need to look out for that one. He's a big, strong kid. I mean, it just, to me, I think the only issue I have is he's got really good size. He's physical. He's got some tools. I think the thing is, I do view him as a pure interior player at the next level, at least as of right now. Now, he's got some body reshaping that needs to be done when that happens. He's kind of like that. He's like that. I'm trying to say how to say this without it sounding bad. Some big young kids they look like giant little kids, right? Like, they still got the baby face and some of the baby weight and stuff, the little kid weight that you got to work off. He hasn't quite hit that that there's like no way to say this without it sounding insulting.
The maturation.
Right. There's a level that young people go through from boyhood to manhood that he hasn't hit yet. And that's actually kind of enticing about him because you're like, this kid's got another growth spurt going and he's already 6'6", 290. You know what I mean? Yeah. But how does his athleticism react to that? Does he have an explosion in athleticism? Does he lose athleticism? And I think that would be something I would want to see that I'll have a much better feel for as you see junior film. So that's, I think, that would be my guess as to why they're holding off on that. But if they offered him, I mean, I'd be okay. I'd be fine with that. I'd be like, oh, now you got your interior guy for the class, right?
Yeah.
And I'd be fine with that. So it's going to be interesting to see kind of how this recruitment carries out, Ryan. Because as you said, when he gets that offer, it's kind of like, okay, that's Notre Dame's going to be tough to beat at that point in time if that offer comes.
Yes, they're going to be. Again, we're not working in absolutes in the recruiting world, but they would be almost impossible to beat if that happens, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's Notre Dame would be a dream offer for Ian Moore. Let's call it what it is. And, I think that decision-making mode would be definitely accelerated a little bit, right? Like I think that's definitely what we're talking about here. So he's a good football player. I like him. I think that he reminds me a little bit Austin Novosad from this cycle, but I think that he has a higher upside than Austin Novosad does. I think he's got a little more natural athleticism. So I like him. It's just a question of what does the board fill out to, right? Because you could like him a lot, but you might like the 2 or 3 other guys a little bit better, right? Like that's the end of the game. There's a lot of guys every year that people perceive as getting passed up, but in reality, it's just staff can't take everyone, right? Like the staff is recruiting at such a high level. You can't take everyone. It's just the reality of it.
Another reality is just because a kid doesn't have an offer and 4 other kids do, doesn't mean he ranks behind those 4 other kids. And that's why we wanted to explain the thing that we said earlier is because it's a timing thing. You're going to offer some kids knowing that they're not going to commit right now. Right. And you've done that research, which is why a kid has an offer. And so we just wanted to explain that reality. Let's get to some skill guys. And one of my favorite skill players in the 2023 class, Ryan, and you know where I'm going with this one, it's Caleb Beasley.
Yep.
His rankings drop in the last couple months has been one of the more puzzling things I've seen. Rivals had him ranked 42nd overall in the 2024 class, which I would argue is spot on. I think that's top 50 ranking. Mm-hmm. The next ranking update out of the top 250 completely.
Doesn't make any sense. Yeah.
Don't get it, but here's what I know. I don't give a crap what the rankings say. That kid's really good, and he's making another return trip to Notre Dame tomorrow. At least that's what we believe to be the case. We've reported that. This is a big one for Notre Dame, right? Again, another guy that I don't believe is in commit mode, but another guy that I think this visit could go a long way towards putting yourself in position where you're going to be potentially the team to beat in this recruitment.
Look, out of the Irish invasion, CJ Carr obviously impacted Cam Williams and Jack Larson. They committed very shortly after he did. And I would argue, Brian, I would love to hear your 2 cents about this. I would argue that no other player was impacted by the Irish invasion, aside from those players, as much as Caleb Beasley was during that event. I thought that he obviously showed out. He had a great performance. You were very adamant about your impressions of just how impressive he was. And I think that he has a relationship with a couple of those kids that are committed right now. And I think they are pushing hard for Caleb Beasley. Of course, he's out of the Tennessee, out of Nashville area, Lipscomb Academy down there. And I think that he likes Notre Dame a ton. The question is, and I've talked to him a little bit about it, he's definitely a kid that I don't think is in a rush to make a commitment. But I would say right now, Notre Dame is in the thick of this one, man. Like they are right near the top. I know that those kids in the class, the Cam Williams of the world, are going to continue to push for Caleb Beasley. Every time I talk to Cam Williams, I ask him like, "Oh, who are you talking to?" Cam Beasley. Cam Beasley is the first guy out of his mouth, right? So that is definitely a big target for the kids that are in the class right now. It's just a question of can they continue the momentum, and when are they able to close out if they can? Because he's a really talented player. I know Notre Dame would love to have him. I know he likes Notre Dame a ton, so the momentum is building and trending that way. And I think that the visit tomorrow can be another big boost to continue to head in that direction eventually.
I think for me, I would actually argue, Ryan, and I get where you're coming from. I do. I get where you're coming from in regards to him being behind those other guys. But I would actually argue just because he didn't commit doesn't mean that visit didn't have a bigger impact on him than it even did, because I feel like Notre Dame was CJ Carr's leader coming into the visit. CJ said to us back, what was it, when the day he committed to Notre Dame, we interviewed him. He said in our show that I believe he said in our show that he considered committing to Notre Dame back in March. So that one was already the case. I think when you look at Jack Larson, we felt that Notre Dame was his leader coming into that visit, very clear leader. And then it was just more about, okay, can they close the deal on Jack Larson this summer? Same with Cam Williams. I feel like that Cam and Caleb are, to me, the two that Irish Invasion moved the most, because Cam was, I would argue, I don't know if Notre Dame was his leader. I mean, we've heard reports about Michigan and other schools. I don't know if he necessarily had a leader coming to the visit. I know Iowa's done a great job recruiting him, and you don't often hear, Iowa being a player, but they've done a great job recruiting him. I just don't think he had like a leader per se coming into that visit, but coming out of Irish Invasion, it was when, not if, and so I feel like Caleb was another one where I know he liked Notre Dame. You had an interview with him a couple months ago where you interviewed him, and it was very clear at the time that he liked Notre Dame, but liked them among a lot of other schools.
Sure.
To where now I feel like Notre Dame is in the very, very top group, and this week's visit could put them at the top. And so when we were at Irish Invasion, one of the things I noticed was he was there with his mom. Caleb came with his mom, his dad, and there's some other people with him. I don't know if they were sisters or what. But, I mean, they looked like they were enjoying the week even more than Caleb was. I mean, they had Notre Dame gear on. His dad is a big guy. I mean, real big guy. And I literally had to ask myself, is this guy incapable of not smiling? Like, I'm dead serious. Like, he had this giant smile on his face. And when I mean big, he's like really tall. Like, I had to look up at him as he's walking past me. But he had this giant smile on his face, like that proud papa smile, like they were really digging the Notre Dame vibe. Very high academic family. That's why he goes to Lipscomb Academy. If you're familiar with that area, you know that's a really good high school. A private school. So I feel like Notre Dame fits a lot of the things that Caleb was looking for. I think this is a relationship building class, which is why it's incredibly important that all the kids you just mentioned about impacting Caleb and him being with are now going to be back on campus. Cam Williams, CJ Carr, getting to see Jack Larson again. Now that those two kids are committed, because last time they were together, CJ, none of them were committed.
Nope.
Now they're all committed except for Caleb. So that's going to be impactful. Now, we are not predicting he's going to commit to Notre Dame. I want to make that real clear. No. This is more about, can you put yourself in position to where you become the team to beat? I think that's what Notre Dame is jockeying for in this visit. And I will be surprised if coming out of this visit, that's not the case with Caleb Beasley.
Said perfectly. Like, again, I think that it's about keeping the momentum and continuing to build the momentum, right? To be the unquestioned leader in the clubhouse right now. I think that is what, and my apologies, I think I called him Cam Beasley earlier. Cam Williams, Caleb Beasley, you get it, right? So Caleb Beasley, I think that everything is trending in the right direction, but this visit tomorrow is another big step in that recruitment, right? Like, this is where you can go from really liking a school on kind of like the same level as a few others to them kind of pulling ahead and then maybe escalating things. But like, either way, getting an early lead with a kid like a Caleb Beasley is a big thing for Notre Dame, because he's a really talented corner. I mean, Brian saw him in person. I wish I could have seen him in person. On film, he reminds me a lot of AJ Terrell. Like, I see some smooth fluidity, but like, the thing about it is that he has a really nice understanding of space, right? Like, he closes quickly, but he just kind of has that innate feeling of like, I know where the ball is going to be. I know where the receiver's hands are, late hands, all that good stuff. So I really like Caleb Beasley a ton. I think he's got kind of an advanced feeling to his game as only a kid that's going to be a junior in high school next year.
When I saw him play, Ryan, the size you see, and he's listed at 175. He looks thicker than that. He looks like 185. He's at least 6 feet tall. He's long. He's strong, and he's smooth. Like he's an easy mover. Like he'd be running with guys, and it was like, yeah, he's not even really running. He's
Right.
like toying with that kid. So I think there's some speed there. He ran like a 4.5, I think, in the 40, which is good.
Fine. Yeah, for his age. Yeah.
But he just plays really fast because he transitions really clean and really well. He's strong. He gets his hands on you, and it's over.
Yes.
So I think he's a kid. I mean, he's a big time kid. I don't care what the rankings say. That's one of the best corners on the board and one of the best corners in the country, in my opinion. I want to stay in the second.
Top 50 player in your opinion, or
in the conversation. Again, I'm not going to say if he's not in the top 50, you guys suck and you don't know what you're doing, because I haven't evaluated enough of the country. No, this may be a loaded year where a guy that's normally ranked 40th is 65th. I mean, that happens sometimes. Like, sometimes a guy who would be 70th in a normal class is 45th in a bad class, right?
Sure.
We see that in the NFL draft all the time. Like guys get drafted, like that's not your normal. What was it last year? Or
saw it last year. Yeah.
It's like where there's only like 12 guys. There's teams that only have like 12, 15 guys with first round grades. Yep. Well, you can't just skip the first, the next 17 picks. It's still round one, right? And so I don't want to get like indignant about, he should, but if you don't have him in your top 100, I know it's not that deep of a class, right? I'm pretty sure of that. He's a top 100 kid for sure. He is. I have not graded him out yet to say definitively he's top 50, but like my eye test, like that's what a top 50 kid looks like. That's what I saw from him, Sure. And I think back to when I saw Jalen Elliott at Notre Dame's camp, and I'm like, that's a Notre Dame kid right there. It was 3-star kid, didn't have a lot, but you saw him and you're like, that kid can play. Same thing with Kevin Stepherson. I was like, yeah, 3-star kid, but I remember watching Kevin Stepherson at Irish Invasion and being like, that's a dude. Well, they were both pretty good football players at Notre Dame. And Jalen was a multi-year starter, captain, was a part of one of the best Notre Dame defenses we've seen in the last 20 years, that 2018 defense. Yeah. Along with 2012, clearly one of the two best defenses of the last 20 years. And so, I mean, you just see certain kids move and you're like, I don't know where to rank that kid, but that's really good. And Caleb Beasley impressed me more than Jalen Elliott and Devin Studstill did when they were here, significantly, especially Jalen. And he did it as a sophomore. They were rising seniors when they were on campus for Irish Invasion. And so he was a really impressive kid for me. Athletically, just carries himself with a quiet confidence, like not a showboater type of kid. Not a, you see these corners at 7-on-7 events, drives me nuts. Just this all the time, right?
Yes.
And it's just like, dude, there's no pads on. I can't, we're throwing the football, right? I mean, it's not like I'm about to stalk block you or something. That's not how he was. He just carried himself with supreme confidence and just went and locked you down. And just like when he'd make a play, it's like, yeah, okay, that's what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to not let him catch the ball. That's my job. Right. I like that, right? Now, I'm not opposed to the kids that are – I love that about Jaden Mickey, right? But you don't want – I don't want a bunch of Jaden Mickey type talkers on my team. I want a couple and then like, okay, I don't need everybody yapping at me. You know what I mean? But that's what Kate – and he's got enough size to where, you start looking at the corner board and you're like, it's kind of a deep board. And you're like, well, this kid could be a nickel. He could be a really athletic cover safety. Because of his size, if that gets him on the field quicker, then transition him to corner when the guys ahead of him graduate. There's a lot you can do with him. But the other thing, too, is he's one of the more pure boundary type of players that Notre Dame has recruited in recent years at corner. Like, to me, him and Benjamin Morrison are probably the most natural boundary corners that Notre Dame has recruited in the last 4 or 5 years. Again, you can't count Cam Hart in that because, number one, Cam Hart's not playing boundary now, but he was recruited to play receiver.
Sure.
Just like even Ryan Barnes, like I think Ryan Barnes can play boundary, but I've always been like, but maybe his range would be more ideal to the field for the similar reasons that Notre Dame has Cam Hart to the field. You got to cover a lot of ground to the field. So put your rangy guy there. So, but as far as the guy, like, look, that guy, that's a boundary corner. If I've seen one, that's what Caleb is to me. The length, the size, the strength, the ability to come up and play at the line without having to jam. Because that's the difference in strength to me. Like if you can jam, that's great. But I like the guys that can sit there and let you make your decision. And then I get my hands on you, and now I'm really strong, and now I'm really moving you. And that's what Caleb was doing at camp, and I really like guys like that. That, to me, as a receiver and a receiver's coach, was even more difficult to handle than the guys that would jam. Because I can teach a receiver how to beat the jam. And if I beat your jam, you're toast.
Sure.
Right. The guys that were most dynamic were the guys that could mirror in their man, but then when they got hands on you, were really strong and you couldn't get off. That to me is more difficult than beating a jam, and then now you're in catch up mode the whole time. Those guys can sit there at the line and be patient, and then let you declare, and then once you declare, get their hands on you and move you. Those are the guys that can be a big problem, and that's something that I saw from Caleb Beasley at that event.
And he's out of the state of Tennessee, and we've talked about, you want to tap into Tennessee from time to time, right? And he looks like one of the better players in the class in that state for next year as well, which is big. So
another DB that's going to be on campus this week, Ryan, is Bronte Johnson from Fort Wayne. We don't have a lot new as far as updates on where his recruitment is, other than he's visiting, but I do want to talk about I do think it's important that they're getting him back on campus again, because it tells me that they're serious about recruiting him, because there's been some questions about, the academic piece and those type of things. And it sounds like Notre Dame thinks he's at least got a foundation to where over the next couple of years, you can build on that and he's going to be okay. But this is a kid to me that if he is a kid that fits the profile to get into school and handle that workload, could be a big one, because he is a really rangy, really athletic, long athlete. And you just don't have a lot of kids like him coming up from Fort Wayne and in-state kids very often.
100%. And I want to reiterate again something that you said, just so people are out there, because if you look at every recruiting profile, it lists him as a wide receiver. Notre Dame is, again, recruiting him as a safety. They want him in the defensive backfield. And I agree completely to your sentiment that people had all asked us for months, Brian. They're like, why hasn't Bronte Johnson been offered yet? Right? Why hasn't he been offered yet? I don't understand. He's the number one player in the state. He's a top 50 kid, yada, yada, top 30 by one platform. Why hasn't he been offered? And it's the fit piece, right? Can he thrive at a place like Notre Dame? If he can, it's a no-brainer offer, right? Like, this kid is a very athletic kid, super fast, fluid, explosive, and 6'3", right? Like, he is a really talented football player. So I think it's a great sign. Last time I talked to Bronte, he was very excited about the Notre Dame offer, to say the very least. He was pumped up about it. If he can fit at Notre Dame, I like Notre Dame's chances in here. But I think that's going to be a relationship where you're going to have to continue to monitor, right? To make sure the fit makes sense, to make sure everything kind of checks those boxes. Because if it does, I think it's a no-brainer for him, for Notre Dame to continue to recruit him to the level they are, because he's really talented, in-state kid, and you have to evaluate those players. And you have to hit on them.
A couple other guys we're going to talk about. We're not going to go over the entire list, but there are some guys I wanted to mention. Number one, Josiah Brown. Don't expect a lot of updates on Josiah Brown, Ryan. They flat out just said we're not going to talk to reporters, which I thought was very interesting. So we'll talk more about him if he makes it this week, which he's expected to. It's going to all be what we hear, and then obviously what we see on film from him. An intriguing guy who also doesn't talk to the media a whole lot, but he is going to be here on Tuesday, which is a guy that I really like. And he was banged up a lot as a sophomore, which is why we've seen his ranking drop a lot. But when he first got on the radar based on freshman film, we're talking about Emmett Mosley. He was considered a borderline 5-star kid. I think he's a surefire top 100 kid just based on what I saw from him as a freshman. Yeah, he is a really dynamic athlete, and he's if I were to tell you, two former Notre Dame athletes, a guy that played for Lou Holtz's football team, and his mother ended her career as an all-time goal scorer at Notre Dame, you'd probably think Emmett is exactly what you'd think a child by that duo would look like, meaning really athletic, right? I mean, really athletic. I like him a receiver. Some people say, he might be better on defense. Very interesting kid, but I mean, when you get a kid on campus whose dad played here, I mean, that's a big one. That's a big one. I'm very curious to see where he is on Notre Dame's board. I don't know the answer to that. I literally haven't asked about it, but man, I gotta have a hard time thinking this isn't a kid that you make a run at, because this is a really talented kid. His younger brother's been offered already. The lineage is obviously there. I'm curious to see how things go with him this week, because that is a really athletic young man.
Well, I put out a barbecue preview that's going to be out here shortly on Irish Breakdown. And Brian, one of the things I said is I think it says the caliber of player he is, the fact that he's ranked by One Services number 120 player in the country, and he didn't play as a sophomore, right? Like he was injured and missed the season. So I think that we're talking about a young man where I put in, I think he's equally as explosive as he is quick. Like he's a kid that I think could play all over and do a lot of different things for your team. So we'll see, because right now the wide receiver board has a lot of great names on it, right? Like we've talked a lot about guys like Ryan Wingo and Micah Hudson and Tyseer Denmark and Brunell Richardson. And there's a lot of great receivers. Mylan Graham, another one right there in state from Indiana. So the question is, what does the pecking order look like at wide receiver? I think that Notre Dame is going to have as good a chance as anybody with Emmett Mosley. But again, it's about pushing for him versus what is the I think it's what does the timeline look like for a kid like him? Like, is he a kid that wants to definitely be at Notre Dame? What does his timeline look like? Because he's a tough kid to get a hold of, obviously, from a media perspective side of everything. But he's an extremely talented player, and getting a player on campus that has two parents that were what they were at Notre Dame, I think speaks volumes to the interest. So hoping for a great visit, obviously, for him.
And what we're saying is not that we question where he is on Notre Dame's board as regards to we're not saying he's not high on the board. They're not. We don't. That's what we're saying. We don't know. It's very early in 2024 recruiting. I think right now with Notre Dame, especially at receiver, it comes down to this. They're still in sort of we're putting our board together type of thing. It's not so much like we have a clear pecking order of this guy and we like this guy more than that guy. It's get a kid on campus, meet with them, get some one-on-one time, see if he's a fit, get to know him. You may love a kid's film, but you need to have that face-to-face. And I think we're seeing that a lot from Notre Dame. And it's a smart thing to do. I mean, that's where you want to be as a staff, is you want to be in a situation where you because we do expect them to have a bigger class in 2023, that they can be a little bit more selective in 24, and you got to be careful not filling up too soon. So it's more a reflection of that. I'd be really hard pressed when I say hard pressed, I'd be shocked if Emmett Mosley's not a top priority for Notre Dame. It's just, I think they need to find out if they're a top priority for him, which I think this visit is going to show. And then it gets down to just kind of, where do you like him? Do you like him better at corner? Do you like him better at receiver? Where do you just want to recruit him as an athlete? I think there's some of those decisions that have to get made as well, because how those decisions get made are going to go a long way towards defining kind of how your board is going to look when it's all said and done. There's another kid that's going to be on campus this weekend, another wide receiver, Jason Robinson. This is an interesting one because, like Emmett Mosley, he's a California receiver. He goes to Long Beach Poly, very dynamic athlete. He is a USC commit right now, which is very interesting, that a USC commit from Long Beach Poly plans on being at Notre Dame this weekend. Ryan, you have talked to Jason, and it does sound like his interest in Notre Dame. I mean, he's in one breath, he's adamant that I'm very much committed to USC, but then he's on again, all these visits this week, I should say, unofficial. The fact that, you talked to him last week, the plan is still that he's going to be here this week. That's a long, expensive trip. Look, I've just booked a couple flights for games this season. Flying right now, not cheap. Flying outside of your time zone, even less not cheap. So the fact that he's coming from California on his own dime, I think says a lot about his interest level. But it's going to be hard to flip him from USC. But the good news is because he's coming on an unofficial, there's no doubt that he's at least listening to what you have to say, I think, is the key.
Well, and he's had nice conversations with Notre Dame, and this is something that he's wanted to set up for a little while. Obviously, he's wanted to get on campus in Notre Dame. The thing for him, Brian, is that he grew up a USC fan. I mean, like, he's a California kid, bred. So USC was kind of the dream school for him at kind of growing up. But I think that what I've learned of Jason is that he's a very thoughtful young man, and he's trying to find the right fit. So although he is committed, I think that he's told me that he wants to go through the full process, right? Like he doesn't want to just look at solely USC and just be like, I'm done. I want to make a very sound decision. So he has interest in Notre Dame. Notre Dame, I think, has interest in him. The question is, can they get themselves in a position where you can overtake a USC? Because, like you said, it's not going to be an easy pull. Like, you're going to have to work to get him to get a level where he's going to decommit, because USC is kind of what he knew growing up. So, but that being said, I know for a fact that he is very high on Coach Stuckey. He spoke a lot of great things about Coach Stuckey. So I think after a visit, there will be a huge indicator on what the level is here for a Jason Robinson.
Anthony Speck is a kid that's going to be on campus this weekend. Ryan had an update on where you talked about him a little bit in your show today. I just want to say briefly, we're not going to dive too much into him, but basically, I think the linebacker board is still being put together. And I think that's kind of the thing is people said, is he a take? And it's I don't know right now. I don't know if he's a take or not. I think the board is still being put together at linebacker, so we won't talk too much about that. So that is kind of the latest on that. There's some other guys coming this weekend. Obviously, some guys that we have on our list that we know of. Brian Robinson, a defensive end from Ohio, is expected to be on campus this weekend. We mentioned Josiah Brown. A kid named Sam Peloff. Just love that name. Texted out or tweeted out today that he'll be on campus this weekend. There's some other guys, but those are the ones we've been able to confirm they're going to be on campus this weekend. So, Ryan, big picture, there's some very, very important kids to Notre Dame's 2024 class on campus this weekend. When you look at Caleb Beasley, Justin Scott, Peter Moore and Peter Jones and Ian Moore, Bronte Johnson, Josiah Brown, Emmett Mosley, Jason Robinson, especially Emmett Mosley. The Notre Dame 2024 class has a chance to be every bit as special as 23, but they've got to have success this week, in my opinion, to be able to – some of these guys you're going to have to get if you're going to have that kind of class. And so I think that makes this week's recruiting deal a pretty big moment for Notre Dame.
Well, I feel like we've been so hyper-focused on 2023 and the numbers that have been accumulated there, you kind of lose focus of the fact that Notre Dame has already got 5 commits in the 2024 class, and they have a chance to really take this to another step, right? Having that 5-star quarterback that we've been talking about for months in the class for 2024, I feel like has been just incredible to see the impact that just having CJ Carr has been, because he's a player that not only the reputation, but I mean, how many times has he been back to campus already, right? Like it's like one of those things where I feel like they should just give him a room at this point, right? Like just stay here all the time. You know, you can get your dorm room early if you're CJ Carr. So it's a big impactful weekend, because not only do we have a couple 2023 kids that I know Notre Dame's excited about with a Ben Minich and a Austin Novosad, but it's really starting to build this 2024 recruiting board. I think is huge for Notre Dame, and it's a great opportunity to get in with some really talented players here.
So, Ryan, let's get into the next topic that we plan to discuss today, which is Jeremiyah Love. And for people complaining about when we're going to talk about him, if you weren't paying attention at the beginning, we said we were going to talk about him at the end. So relax and stop complaining. Frustrate me sometimes. This wasn't a Jeremiyah Love show, so very clearly. But we are going to talk about Jeremiyah Love. It's a big recruitment for Notre Dame, right? It's a big commitment they're trying to land. Jeremiyah Love's a kid that told you, Ryan, a couple weeks ago that he was down to 2, right? It was going to be Notre Dame and some school he wasn't willing to say at the time. This is one that Notre Dame, I think, is trying to close. He said he's going to commit before the end of the season, right? So give the latest on where things stand with Jeremiyah Love and just kind of what we're looking at for Notre Dame.
He's actually aiming for a summer decision, right? So we should know this one before the season even starts. So like Brian said, after his last visit to Notre Dame, he told me that Notre Dame was in his top 2. And after the visit, he had a great visit to Notre Dame. So I think that Notre Dame it's closing time, right? I mean, it's literally them between one and other school. If Notre Dame's able, I think, to knock this one out of to knock the next couple weeks out of the park and really to kind of just reiterate, like, hey, you're our guy, right? Like, we need you in this class, wherever you end up fitting, whether it is at running back or at wide receiver or at safety, who cares? Ultimately, they want Jeremiyah Love in the class. And I think that it's closing time for Notre Dame. You have to get this player in the class because this is not a need. This is a want. You want this type of athlete if you're Notre Dame in the 2023 class.
I love his versatility too, and we'll kind of go over that when we pop in the film. But I think that's another big thing, Ryan, is finding a kid that can do so many different things and do it at a high level. But you wrote an article yesterday, and it was talking about just the speed that Notre Dame is bringing to the table, and that's another thing is that they are clearly making a concerted effort to find guys that can flat out run. And Jeremiyah Love is a guy that can flat out run. There's no question about it.
10.7.6 as a sophomore in the track and field. And he's a bigger guy too. This isn't like Michael Bell's extremely fast. We talked about him, but Michael Bell's 165 pounds, right? Jeremiyah Love is a legit 6'1", 195 pounds, which I working on a piece where, I think he could be 220 pounds, like 215, 220 pounds when all is said and done. So this is a legitimate high upside type of running back with game-breaking speed. That's what this player is. So whether you want to comp him to Josh Adams or CJ Procise, I think this is one of the more physically gifted running backs that Notre Dame has targeted over the last few years.
He is. Now, we're going to pull up the film next, Ryan. So we're going to do a little bit of a Jeremiyah Love film breakdown. And we're just going to kind of watch through some of his junior film and take a peek at what Jeremiyah brings to the table. So got to do something here real quick because this thing, just for some reason, I tell you what, man, it's striking my last nerve today. For some reason, every now and then it just decides it doesn't want to allow me to share the screen. So you're just going to have to give me a second. Don't you hate it when this happens? So it's working yesterday, but now all of a sudden it's not working today. So just give me a second. We'll pull this up and add this. All right. So just give me a second, Ryan. So actually, why don't you go ahead and talk a little bit about just his positional fit for right now as I'm getting this corrected.
Yeah. So obviously the positional fit early on is running back, right? 6'1", 195 pounds. And that's kind of what we see him as, but he's a player that has said that he wants to be recruited as an athlete. So there are legitimate upside to him, I think, as a wide receiver, as a safety. Think about CJ Procise. I think that's a decent comp on Brian's part. What Brian kind of spoke about before is the fact that CJ Procise at one point was a wide receiver at Notre Dame. He was a safety at Notre Dame. And eventually he moves out to running back and he becomes a 1,000-yard runner, right? Like, I think that that's what this type of athlete is, but I think that he does have high upside as a running back at the next level. He's a kid that I think is going to grow into that body frame really well. And he has the body type where I don't think he's going to sacrifice any speed. Like, he's not going to get too bulky and then play outside of his frame. He's going to play in that frame. And I think that he is a player that when it's all said and done, he could be one of the better running backs out of the 2023 class, wherever he ends up.
All right, so we're not going to do a Jeremiyah Love film breakdown right now, Ryan. So I've got to see. I don't have a clue what's going on. So I think StreamYard's having some issues today because they're not letting me share the screen, something that we do constantly. So, yeah, so that's the deal there. So let's go ahead and jump into our Q&A. We have a lot of questions that we have here, and we're just going to jump into those. So we're going to jump into our Q&A. So let's get at the top. We'll just kind of answer some of the Jeremiyah Love questions. First one, Ryan, if Jeremiyah Love wanted to play receiver at Notre Dame, can he help and compete with the caliber of talent Notre Dame is bringing in?
I think he can. I wide receiver actually wouldn't be my first position that I would try him out at. Like I said, I think he's a running back, and but I think that he can. Yeah, John. I think that he's even a player where, whether you're talking about slot or he even has the speed where I think that he could play a little bit outside. I think he could definitely help you and compete. But I do ultimately think he's a running back first and foremost.
Tyler Binge, I got it. What would you? Oh, I got that one from him. Let's see here. Anthony Solomon talking about the 23 class. If Notre Dame gets Hannafin, is this a gap closing or gap erasing wide receiver class?
I think it's gap closing. Actually, now gap erasing, I would say at that point, right? Because then we're talking about having the upside of a Ronan Hannafin with the upside of a Braylon James with the floor of a guy like a Jaden Greathouse and a Rico Flores. At that point, I think you have a great mixture of guys that could play immediately and then guys that have incredible upside moving forward as well. So I think that would be an erasing class at that point. Definitely closed, but I think that quickly you're going to kind of flip the script on that one.
I don't think it's gap erasing because I don't know if it's capable, if Notre Dame's capable of having a gap erasing class in 2023. And what I mean by that is, I think here's what I mean by that, Ryan. I don't disagree with anything you just said. I just don't know if Notre Dame is capable of doing it no matter who they get. That's the reality of it. I don't know. Just because, again, right now we anticipate Notre Dame having a situation where there's only going to be 4 scholarship receivers coming back next year.
Mm-hmm.
So you get 4 guys, you're at 8. It's like one more recruited scholarship guy than you have right now. And now you're in a situation where over half of those guys will be freshmen or sophomores. Half of your roster is going to be freshmen. So I just don't know if it's possible to erase the gap in this class outside of, like, you landed, Shelton Sampson, just whoever the 4 best receivers in the class are. And even then, I'd still say, yeah, but you're still short of numbers.
Sure.
And so I think that's kind of my issue at this point in time. Is I just don't know if you can say that with one class. When that's different for like one class on the D line, because they've been recruiting the D line pretty good for years. Now they took it to another level with this Keon Keeley, Boubacar, Brendan Vernon, Devin Houston class. I think that's one where you could argue that, right? Tight end, the gap's been erased for a minute. Like any losses they had on the offensive line, you've kind of gotten back in the last couple of years. I mean, so it just depends on where you are. But I think with where this receiver depth chart was, when you consider you lost 5 guys in one offseason going into 2021, and then you lose Kevin Austin, your best player, and and then you replace those losses with 1 receiver in the 2022 class. I think just numbers wise, they're going to have to go. But from a talent infusion standpoint, everything that Ryan said earlier holds true. They are, if they can get Ronan Hannafin, they would certainly be doing about as good of a job as they could have done in this class. But he is key to that, because it's going to be tough to say that if you don't get Ronan Hannafin.
I agree completely.
In this class.
Agree completely.
Benjamin McCarthy shined up for the board the other day. Says, I love all the info on the board. Took me long enough, but I am now there. That is all that matters. And he signed up for an annual membership. So we are going to see him around quite a bit. So we very much appreciate that. Appreciate you being part of what we're doing there. Very, very much. Sean Jeter said, and we have some team stuff here too. This doesn't have to be about just recruiting. It says, what is an opinion you have for the 2022 season that you have absolutely zero evidence to support? Mine is that Stanford will overachieve and win 9 games somehow. I love the premise of that. You have zero evidence to believe this. Here's one, because I have zero evidence to believe this, but I believe it will be true. And I think this will be a much better coached Notre Dame football team than it was last year. I have zero evidence to believe that, because this staff has not coached a single game together, right? Marcus Freeman has not coached one game as a head football coach, in my opinion, that means anything. Because I don't put a lot in the bowl game. But as far as what do I have? What info do we have? What have we seen to make me believe that? Nothing. It's what I think based on what these guys have done. But I have zero evidence to believe that this staff, as currently constituted, will be better coached than Notre Dame has been in several years. But I believe it to be true. It's a prediction that I have for the season. What's yours, Ryan?
I would go with a player one for me. I would go that Audric Estime becomes the bell cow, long term. And I think that we both see the upside there. But I mean, what did he have last year, Brian? 7 carries in 1 football game, right? Like, there's nothing for us to believe that he is going to just come in and be the bell cow of the running back unit. So I've been calling the Audric Estime breakout for a little bit here over the last couple months, and I'm going to stick to that one. I think he eventually becomes the guy at the running back position with Chris Tyree's explosive mixed in, a part of like a thunder or lightning competition.
Speaking of, it's funny you say that because the very next question from John A1 is the possible duo of Audric Estime and Chris Tyree will be the best Notre Dame duo since ... prediction. I know Diggs is a player too, but he's recovering from injury with Price. I mean, because Notre Dame's had some pretty good 1-2 punches in recent years. I mean, the Kyron Williams 1-2 punch was pretty decent in 2020 when they actually used Chris Tyree. You go back to 2018, it was sort of a duo, but not when Dexter came back, he was that guy. Thinking back to 2015, it was a similar thing where, like, numbers wise, that was the best duo they had. When you look at CJ Prosise rushed for 1,100 yards, Josh Adams set a freshman record of over 700 yards, but they rarely used them together. Josh got in and Josh got 5 carries, rushed for 2 touchdowns in the opener because of the injury to Torian Folston. After that, he just basically got mop-up duties. I remember the USC game, he comes off the bench, rips off a 26-yard run to set up a touchdown, and doesn't touch the ball again the rest of the game. It was so weird. But, that's kind of was how they did it in a lot of years, which is really weird. But they weren't really a duo. I mean, I think you kind of have to go back, in my opinion, to sort of 2012 to get the last, like, true duo where they would use multiple players together, and it was really a trio. It was Theo Riddick, Sear Wood, and then George Atkinson also had some big moments that year as well. So the last time that I would argue that Notre Dame used a true duo was 2012, and then before that it was 2011. And I certainly think that this duo would have a chance to surpass that one. Although I do think it's kind of I think this duo in style would be more similar to the 2011 duo of Sear Wood and Jonas Gray, which I would argue was the best duo Notre Dame had under Brian Kelly. Until Jonas got hurt in 2011, that duo was nasty. Jonas obviously got hurt against BC, so he didn't play the last 2 games. But in 11 games, he carried the ball 114 times for 791 yards, 12 touchdowns. He averaged 6.9 yards per carry.
Is that good?
Yeah, it's pretty decent. Yeah, it's pretty good. I mean, he was on pace because remember he had 4 carries for 17 yards, and his season started off bad. Remember, he got stripped at the goal line against South Florida. He was the guy that fumbled that they returned it back. Carried the ball 4 times for 17 yards that game. He was on pace if you look at the numbers he was putting up. I mean, he was a good game away in the final 2 games, and he didn't finish against BC of potentially getting to 1,000 yards and could have given them 2 1,000-yard receivers that year. So, to me, that was the best duo that Notre Dame has had. And it was a similar duo because Jonas was sort of a one-cut-and-go guy. The funny thing is, that's more of how Chris Tyree is, one cut and go. Sear was the smooth, and that's kind of more how Audric is, but Audric can then also lower the boom on you. I think that's the thing that people are sleeping on, Ryan, is you saw him play in high school. And yes, he's big and strong, can run you over. This kid's got really good feet.
Sure
really good feet. And you even saw that last year against Navy with the spin move he had. He's not going to just run you over. He's going to do other things. And I really like that thunder and lightning sort of approach. I think could be really good because that's how I kind of felt a little bit about the 2011 group. Jonas could run you over, but that wasn't really necessarily his game. I think this duo could be better. It's going to be younger and less experienced, but it could end up being a better combination.
I kind of like the Audric Estime to Jonas Gray comparison. That's interesting. I've never thought about that one. I don't know if you've ever mentioned that one before, but there's some similarities there.
Yeah.
Like they look like a power back, but like then you kind of undersell the shiftiness in the feet that they have in the hole, and they kind of make guys miss in tight quarters. That's interesting. So yeah, I mean, I guess you would have to go that far though, right? Because I mean, Notre Dame over the last few years has kind of been, they have a bell cow, but they've had some years where their bell cow gets hurt and then they have to find another bell cow, right? Like they haven't really done the kind of the interchangeable thing. So I think they have a chance, man. Like, because I really do think that Chris Tyree and Audric Estime are going to get not an even split, especially early on, but I think that you could have hit a little niche there and a little momentum where like, hey, we need to get both these guys the football and we need to be creative with how they're getting them. And I think that that's where you get the 1-2 punch type of combination.
Yep. Good question. Irishman 7114. Excuse me. Here we go. Assume Notre Dame finishes 23 with Austin Novosad, Jeremiah Love, Ronan Hannafin, Samuel Mpemba, Jaden Osborne, Ben Minich to make 26 commits. Is that enough for a top 5 class? And how many do they take in 2024? Buddy, that's way past enough. Honestly, if Notre Dame only – here's the thing. If Notre Dame only gets 4 of those 6, it's a top 5 class.
Yes.
I mean, it's all but guaranteed to be a top 4 class, in my opinion. Top 5 class. If they get all those guys, yeah, you're closer to 1 than you are 5 at that point in time. And now, will it be enough for number 1? I don't know, but is that enough for a top 5 class? More than enough. There's no question about that. More than enough.
Well, I was going to say, even if you take Mpemba out of there and you just hit 5 of 6, that's a top 3 class, easy in
Most
my opinion.
likely. In this particular year, especially when you're seeing more talent being spread out than you have in past years, I would agree with you. I would agree. At worst, that class is 4th.
Yeah. And if you get Mpemba, then that's a top 2 class, and that's where you're really fighting for that number 1 spot, in my opinion.
The interesting thing is losing a Hannafin of the other guys would have the least impact because he's not ranked properly. Now, I would argue that's nonsense. And if we're looking at this practically, forget what the rankings say. Looking at this as practically, that hurts your class a lot. I'm just simply looking at it from a recruiting rankings standpoint because only 247 right now has even remotely come close to properly ranking Ronan Hannafin. They've jumped him up to 166. I'm comfortable with that. I have him close to the top 100. But because the position he's going to play is something he's kind of not really experienced at, I'm okay with 166. Questions about his, competition, all that stuff, whatever. I have him higher, but I'm not going to argue with that. Some say him as a 3-star, and that's just patently absurd. Yes. But it wouldn't crush your rankings to not get him, but it would hurt you practically not to get him. But, Jaden Osbury, we feel really good about. He's a highly ranked guy. Austin Novosad, he'll help you more with some rankings than others. He'll help you more in 247 because they just bumped him up to 89th in the country.
Yep.
So that would help. He's 188th on 3. Rivals has him at 136, so that would give you a bump if you can get him. Jeremiah Love's borderline consensus top 100 player. I think the lowest ranking he has right now is 104.
Mm-hmm.
I think right now it's his lowest ranking. So yeah, you're getting a huge jump from those guys. And this is what we talked about last week, Ryan, where when people kind of are there's a lot of Notre Dame fans, and again, we know what it's called. It's BKPTSD, where Notre Dame jumps out number 1 and they're like, okay, now let's just sit back and wait for these other schools to catch you. This list right here shows that Notre Dame, they're number 1 now. They're number 1 on ESPN. They're tied for number 1 on Rivals. They're number 1 on the 247. It's either 247's own list has them number 1. The composite, I believe, has them number 2. And I think, and they're number 1 on 3 consensus, I believe, but then number 2 on 3 specific rankings. So they're either 1 tied for 1st or 2nd on all the different rankings. And they're significantly ahead of most everybody else other than Ohio State. But they're still some big-time players, as we see down here on the board. Jeremiah Love's a top 100 recruit. Novosad's a top 100 recruit. Hannafin's a top 200 recruit. Alsbury's a top 100 recruit by half of the services. Minich is the only guy that doesn't really bring a whole lot to the table from a recruiting ranking standpoint. But with some of the recruiting rankings, it won't matter because they only rank the top 20 guys. Mm-hmm. So it's a really interesting class. But yes, that would absolutely be a top 5 class. No doubt about it. John Mayo asked, he said, I've heard rumors that Justin Rhett wants to come back to Notre Dame. Any truth to this? John, I have not heard that rumor. I can assure you that Notre Dame is not in conversation with Justin Rhett. So he may want to come back to Notre Dame. I have no idea if he does or doesn't. I'd be surprised by it. I have not heard this rumor before, but I can confidently say that Notre Dame is not recruiting Justin Rhett right now. And I'm not saying that to be but they will in a week. No, I have, as far as I know, there are no plans for them to make a move on Justin Rhett. I think Notre Dame is very happy with how their cornerback board panned out. And you also have to remember, it was not a one-sided decision. That was a decision where Notre Dame, and if it was one-sided, it was more on Notre Dame's side than it was on Justin Rhett's side, if you remember that. that scenario. John A1, this is a good team one, Ryan. Which O-line development performance during fall camp will be the most important for the offensive line to be where it needs to be week 1?
I think, I mean, it's going to be comfortability playing in the different positions, right? I mean, we're talking about Jared Patterson potentially moving out to left guard. We're talking about Zeke Corral coming back in at center. You're talking about Josh Lugg playing right guard, a position that he's played before, but he just played all of 2020 at right tackle, right? Or 2021, excuse me. So I think it's the meshing, and that's a big thing, is that offensive line is about a cohesiveness between, left tackle all the way to right, and a comfortability playing next to each other. So I think you're seeing 3 different players are going to be playing a different position than they played potentially in the 2021 season. So I think it's as much about, like, let's get them in those positions and let's start getting that cohesiveness to work together, because when you're doing something that's different, you have to be able to, get reps at that, right? So I think that for me, the biggest thing about the offensive line is you have to find the right 5, but then you have to give them a time to gel together, because it's such an important position. It's such an important thing to be able to be comfortable with the people around you playing offensive line.
Next question from John A1. How teachable is ball placement for quarterbacks? Is ball placement an ability skill that is naturally inherent to a player's feel for the game, or can guys work on it and become elite with given physical tools? I think it's both. I think there's a couple things to this, John. Number one is with quarterback play, it's no different than anything else. There's always a natural ability that some guys have. I don't think Jimmy Clausen was a very coached up kid, right? But he also had a knack, a natural feel for where to put the football, and had the natural ability to do that. There are some guys that absolutely know where they want to put the ball, but they can't always do it for a host of reasons. Sometimes it can be something as simple as their hands are too small and they don't get or not strong, and they can't get as strong of a grip on a ball, because sometimes when you're trying to place that thing, you're going to naturally have to squeeze it a little bit tighter to try to force it into a tighter window. And some guys can't throw as effectively in that situation. Some of it's footwork. If you want to put a ball low and away, there's a way to step to that. So there's some things that can be enhanced to that. There's some things about release point that can be addressed. Now, release point is not about your throwing motion. It's about the release point. If you want to so for example, one of the things that I harped on with quarterbacks when I coached is when guys wanted to get touch on the ball, they would dip their back shoulder and then do it that way. I hated that. I think that causes the ball to hang. I think it makes your pass less accurate. What I would say is you want to dig a little bit, maybe more on that back foot, but it's about the release point. Let the ball go sooner. That way you still have good arm speed. You're still snapping your wrist, and the ball's going to get up and get down quicker, because you don't want it to float. And so that is something that can be fixed. Now, a guy may be able to perfectly place it on the outside, but it's not going to be as effective if he's not able to get a little bit more zip on that touch pass. So there's all types of things like that that can be improved upon. But the reality is some guys are just never going to have great ball placement, and some guys naturally will. Mark Sanchez, to me, was one of the more fundamentally sound quarterbacks to come out of college in a long time. I mean, when I watched him play, there was nothing I could look at and say, this is why he's not super accurate. There was nothing I could look at someone and say, if I could correct this, he just didn't have that natural feel for where to put the ball or the timing of it, right? But he just wasn't a super accurate quarterback. Honestly, this is going to sound crazy. I don't think Peyton Manning was a super accurate quarterback the way that Tom Brady is. His timing was so impeccable that he didn't have to have the same ball placement that Aaron Rodgers has on throws, right? But he understood. He still had a great feel mentally for the game of where the ball needed to go, even though he couldn't necessarily put it quite as well as, like, say, an Aaron Rodgers, for example. So there's other aspects to it, but some guys, just no matter what you do, they're just not going to have a great feel. It's not even that they don't want to, but for whatever reason, maybe their throwing motion isn't conducive to it. Maybe they can't get the release point down properly. You see this with baseball pitchers. Why can some baseball pitchers put the ball wherever the heck they want? Some guys that can't. It's not that they don't want to. It's like, I want to be able to throw the ball in the low outside part of the plate, but I just can't. So there's always something to it. But yes, it is a skill that can be that is inherent. It is a skill that can be worked on. But I'll say the last part, the only way it can become elite with all the work in the world is if you have a natural feel to it, right? To be an elite ball placement guy, you have to have a natural feel with really good coaching. Like some kid who's never been coached isn't going to just walk out there and put the ball wherever he wants on every throw. He's going to have a knack for it, but then it requires the coaching build up to be able to allow that to effectively happen on Saturdays. So that would be, John, that would be my answer to that when it comes to quarterback play.
You guys all heard it. Ryan said that Peyton Manning was overrated. Go ahead. Sorry.
Today is not the day for that, my friend.
I'm sorry.
Today's not the day for
that. I know. Trust me. I get it.
Jack Sullivan said, is there time for a non-recruiting question? Always. Position by position, how would you compare 2021 Oklahoma State to 2022 Ohio State? Well, offensively, I don't think there is any comparison to me. I mean, is there a position on Oklahoma State's team that you would put in the same ballpark as Ohio State's? I think that their offensive line in 2021 was more fundamentally sound than Ohio State's was, but that's partly why Coach Stud's not there anymore. They don't have the size or the talent or the athleticism that Ohio State had on the offensive line. It's not really close anywhere else. Defensively, it's a different conversation. Linebackers, big advantage to Oklahoma State. Big advantage to Oklahoma State. Defensive line is an interesting one because if we're going to sit here as NFL scouts, it's a no-brainer. It's Ohio State. If we're going to go off who was the better college defensive line, Ohio State's 2022 defensive line is going to have to get a lot better if it's going to be better than what Oklahoma State's was last year, Ryan.
Agreed. I mean, when you have guys like Brock Martin and I forget Oliver's first name, is it Colin Oliver was the freshman last year for Oklahoma State, but and then Tyler Lacey, Oklahoma State had some really good college football players in that defensive line and some productive college football. Weren't they the leader in sacks last year, college football wise, right? Like they were at least
they led the nation in sacks last year. Yeah.
Yeah. They were a fantastic unit. And again, none of them is the talent that Zach Harrison is, but they're also better football players than Zach Harrison is right now, right? Like that's a huge difference. Right. So, I mean, it's a huge advantage from a college football perspective for Oklahoma State defensive line.
I think secondary is an interesting conversation, Ryan. Again, how much projection are we going to be able to do with the Ohio State secondary? Because I know Ohio State, it's hilarious listening to some Ohio State fans on the message board or on the YouTube channel. You'd swear to God that 3 of their returning secondary guys are going to be top 10 picks next year. They still are living this fantasy world that they got Eli Apple, Von Bell, Marshawn Latimer, Jeff Okudah trotting out this year in the secondary. And it's just not accurate, in my opinion. Now, could it be a good secondary this year? Yes. But the reality is I don't care how bad Kerry Coombs was as a coach last year. That was also partly a talent problem. They didn't have great talent. They had good talent. They still have good talent, but I would say that so did the Oklahoma State secondary, which is partly why Jim Knowles brought McAllister with him because they needed him to play, and they're always going to play. I will say this: Ohio State has the more athletic secondary, but the secondary last year for Oklahoma State was really good. It was a very good secondary. The Bernard Converse kid was really good. They had 3 really good safeties, including Tanner McAllister. They had kids that could cover. There's a reason in the regular season they allowed in a passing league, they allowed 1 receiver to go for 100 yards last year. 1. That's it. Notre Dame had 3 in the Fiesta Bowl alone. So it's kind of like what people like. Notre Dame's defense is not as bad as it looked like in the Fiesta Bowl. I'd make the same case for Oklahoma State's. They were not that bad at pass defense coming in the season. They were a top 10 pass defense coming into that season last year. The most they had allowed all year was 307 to Iowa State. After that, their next highest was 252 yards against Oklahoma, but that was on 39 pass attempts from Caleb Williams. Caleb Williams completed 51.3% of his passes, averaged 6.5 yards per attempt against Oklahoma State. They were not having a lot of success. Teams were not having a lot of success completing passes against Oklahoma State last year. They just weren't. Notre Dame had success because they got really good players. And it was also a bowl game and, what to expect from this. And that's why I just don't put a ton on bowl games. But when you watch film of Oklahoma State last year, They had a very, very good secondary. Very good secondary. And will Ohio State's be more physically talented, Ryan? I would say yes. Would you agree with that? Physically, just athleticism and talent. Yep. But they're going to have to improve a lot from where they were last year to be better than Oklahoma State's, in my opinion.
I don't disagree with that because I think that Jarek Bernard-Converse, who now transferred to LSU, I mean, he's most well-coached one out of any. If you put all Ohio State cornerbacks in a pool and you put all the Oklahoma State kids from last year in a pool, he's the most technically sound player. And then they had number 31, whose name's escaping me at safety, who's a good player. You mentioned McAllister. They had Trey Sterling back there at safety as well, who I'm not even sure played against Notre Dame. I think he may have missed that game. Yeah. But I mean, really good players, though. I mean, really good college football players. Are they going to be stars at the NFL level? No. Could Denzel Burke be a dude on the NFL level if he improves? Sure. Could Ronnie Hickman be that dude? Sure. But right now, they aren't those guys, right? Yeah. They are right now not as good at college football players as what we saw at Oklahoma State in 2021. Right.
You're talking about Colby Harvell-Pell. And the other thing, too, is, Jack, if we're talking about where they'll be against Notre Dame, that's what our answers were for, is where will they be against Notre Dame? I've said this in previous shows. Ohio State, in my opinion, is going to be a lot better team in November than they will be in September. I mean, Notre Dame will as well, but I think Ohio State especially, because there are some things that they have to overcome that aren't just going to magically change just because there's a new coach. Same with Notre Dame. There's going to be areas where Notre Dame's going to be a lot better. Like, I expect the offensive line to be a lot better in October, November than it is going to be on September 3rd. That doesn't mean it won't be good on September 3rd, but I don't think that he's – like, Notre Dame against Ohio State, I don't think – well, maybe it should be this. I'm not expecting it to look like the 2017 offensive line in September 3rd. I think that would be an unfair expectation. So I think it'll take a little bit of time, in my opinion. Got Rob O'Meara. Do they prefer Minich over Coach McCullough's son, Dea? Yes, they do.
That's why they're recruiting him.
Yeah, exactly. John A1, will Notre Dame field a top 3 team in terms of physicality? What do you expect from this team's unit, and unit to unit as far as being physical? That's a good question, John. I would say it would be hard for me to expect them to be that in year one, because one of the complaints I had about Notre Dame last year, which is I still can't believe I actually had this about Notre Dame, they were not an overly physical football team last year on either side of the ball. We talked about they could run. I think that's the thing that a lot of people didn't give Notre Dame's team enough credit for last year. They had a lot of kids that can run, and receiver, you've got Kevin Austin went and ran a 4.43. I have been told by people he was at best their third fastest receiver, at best. With Avery Davis is ahead of him, and I've had people tell me that, Braden Lindsey's ahead of him, but I've had people tell me Avery Davis ran faster 40 times than Kevin Austin did. Now, I'm just talking like last year, for example. Secondary, Kyle Hamilton can run. Cam Hart can flat out fly. He can run. The linebackers could run. I think Notre Dame's linebackers weren't really athletic. I disagree. I don't think athleticism was their problem last year. I think length was their problem last year. They had a pretty athletic defensive line. Notre Dame has guys that can run. The problem last year is they weren't soft. I'm not saying that. They just weren't physical. And I think a lot of that was in the preparation. And I know that's something that Coach Freeman wants to fix. And I think a big part of that comes from if your offensive line is going to set that agenda. And the fact that they weren't a very physical offense, I think it does. That's one area where I think the two sides of the ball can impact each other, and the offense can have a big impact on the defense. Because if you're not getting banged on Monday to Friday, it's hard to just turn that switch on Saturday. You know what I mean? When you talk about defensive line play. So there's a ways to go before I would say they're one of the top 3. Because obviously Georgia's going to be in that conversation. They're going to be in there. There's a big difference between the physical. Forget talent. Take talent out of the conversation, Ryan, because talent's a different thing here. Yep. Just the way Georgia plays, they are significantly more physical than what Notre Dame was last year. Significantly. Mm-hmm. So there's a long way to go between where Notre Dame was in 2021 and where they would need to get to in 2022 for them to be top 3. Now, they better be top 10, right? I mean, that can be fixed right away, but it's a mindset thing that I think can take some time to truly get to the level. I mean, Kirby's been building towards this since the minute he was hired.
Sure.
And Marcus Freeman has to overcome a lack of physicality that they had, and to make it more so, which is why I think he does want to emphasize being better at running the football.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a mindset thing, right? I mean, to your point, it's like this has to be ingrained, and there's some bad habits that need to be changed, and you need to kind of set the standard, right? And that's like a big thing for Coach Freeman and the staff. And I mean, when I think of physical teams too, Brian, like even like a Utah will pop in my head, right? Like Kyle Whittingham has some physical football teams. Are they always the most athletic? No, they're good. I mean, they're good. They have solid talent for sure, but they just play such a physical brand of football. But why is that? Because he's been there so long, and that's all they know. That is ingrained in them. If you're not going to be that way, then you're not going to last on that team. And usually Iowa's the same way, right? Like Kirk Ferentz usually puts out a really physical product. You talked about Georgia. Like those teams have just kind of that demeanor to them, which has been learned, right? So I think that you can't expect it to be just like a flip of the script. It's like, Coach Heastand, is the offensive line going to be improved? Absolutely. Is it going to be up to Heastand's standards? Hopefully by the middle to end of the season, we hope. But either way, year 2 under Coach Heastand, in theory, is going to be better than year 1. It's going to be a continued evolution and just improvement in that department, in my opinion.
I do think the closer they get to that, the better they'll be.
100%.
As far as just overall team. John also asks, how do you expect Jarrett Patterson to play at guard? Will he be an impact player in the run game? Look, here's the thing. I think a lot is being made by some about the move of him from center to guard. I don't think it's that big of a difference. If anything, I think it allows him to play with a little bit more explosiveness off the ball. Yep. Can he be an impact player in the run game? It depends. I think he can be an impact player in the run game by how I would define it, which is more broadly being highly effective and efficient at what you do. Yes, I think he's athletic. He gets to the second level well. I think not having a snap allow him to use both of his hands. So I do think that he can be an impact player. If you define impact as, is he going to look like Quentin Nelson or Mike McGlinchey in 2017? No, different type of player. Sure. I think he can be an impact player in a run game. It's just not going to look the same way when Quentin Nelson did it, right? Because they're just different types of players. So that would be my answer to that. Let's see. We got a few more here that we'll get to before we get out of here. Stonador, is it normal for commits to be so involved with recruiting? Love to see CJ Carr putting so much effort in to help build this class. Yeah, it's been going on for a while.
Yeah.
I think like Gabriel Rubio, Blake Fisher were huge, huge recruiters in 2021. Last year, we've kind of talked about some of the guys. Nolan Ziegler was a big part of what they did last year. The difference now is because of social media, you and us, we can all see it more. But yeah, building relationships has always been a very important part of that. Now, the thing is, it's always been a part of it since this recruiting calendar was expanded the way that it was. As I've said before, it wasn't that long ago that a lot of the best players and a lot of players didn't commit until after their senior seasons. So it was all kind of happened a lot quicker. You're seeing it goes on so much longer now that it allows more time to build those relationships. Where in the past it was always like, hey man, I'm good, you're good, let's go do this thing together. And it would be something that was decided later. But when you did have the longer relationship things, it would be like kids from the same region. All the kids from Miami talking about wanting to go to the U, or all the kids from, LA talking about let's go to USC or whatever. It would be more stuff like that was regional. Now it's just TJ Carr can talk to a kid from Hawaii just as easily as he can talk to a kid from Detroit, in regards to the access to communication. Because back when we were kids, if you wanted to build a relationship up, back when I was a kid, Ryan didn't have this problem, I don't think. Back when I was a kid, if you wanted to build a relationship with a kid that lived across the country, it cost money. It's called a long distance phone call. You know what I mean? Like, we didn't have. It wasn't until I went to college the first time I got on an instant messenger type of thing, right? So it's a different world, but it was always there. It's more prominent now and more exposed to it now. Sean Kane asks, is Howard Cross likely to start at nose or back up Jason A, or does it depend on the progress of Jacob Lacey and Smith at nose guard? I expect him to start. I expect him to start at nose.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
with a
Yeah.
with a healthy dose of Jacob Lacey in there as well.
And Smith. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I think those four will kind of play the inside spots unless some of the younger guys are gonna be able to climb into that. So yeah, I would expect him to be a player. He's just so small. I mean, I just saw a picture the other day of all the linemen hanging out, and I'm like, man, he's so little, But I mean, he gets the job done, gets the job done.
Tough New Jersey kid, man.
Yeah, there you go. Go Irish. Is anyone hearing if Notre Dame showing interest in Jordan Marshall, running back out of Moeller High School in Cincinnati? He was at Irish Invasion, and so clearly there's a relationship there. Right now, I don't know where he stands in regards to getting an offer, but yeah, they're on him. I mean, they're on him. There's no doubt about that. Call me Ty with a question here. By the way, Justin Marshall's a 2024 running back, just to be clear. Call me Ty, different type of player. Do you put Scott in the same level as a recruit as Keon Keeley? Okay, here's my thing. If we're going to go back to when they were both sophomores, he's better than Keon Keeley. He's a better player, high school player, as a sophomore than Keon Keeley was as a sophomore. Keon at a young age was about projection, right? It's when the light goes on, he will be this. So the ceiling was always higher for Keon. But Justin was a more disruptive, dominant player as a junior than Keon was. I mean, as a sophomore than Keon was a sophomore. However, Justin would have to make a big leap to be better than what Keon was as a junior, right? Because that's the thing is from day one, you all remember me talking about this. Like, this kid is a 5-star waiting to happen. That was the thing about Keon. Justin Scott is also that kind of player, but I don't know if, like, I would say, like, I think Keon could be a top 5 pick. I think Justin Scott's more of a top 10 to 15 overall pick if they both maximize their potential for looking at from the NFL draft, because of the fact one plays on the edge and one plays inside. So is he quite on the same level as Keon? No, not quite there from a projection standpoint. He's more advanced than Keon was because he's so much bigger. I mean, Keon was a 6'6" string bean as a sophomore, right? Justin Scott's 300 pounds already, so he's just further along, but the ceiling for Keon is higher. And that's true of any defensive lineman I've seen in the 2024 class. Every single one. I mean, Elijah Rushing, Nigel Smith, I mean, all of them. Great prospects. But Keon's not the kind. There's not a Keon Keeley in every single class nationally. Forget Notre Dame's class, nationally. That's what I think of Keon Keeley. Thoughts on that, Ryan? Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I have not seen Keon Keeley's sophomore tape, so I need to go back and watch that to be able to compare adequately. It's an awesome statement though to make. I mean, I would love to see it just because, I mean, obviously we know what Keon Keeley is now, right? So that's kind of where my disconnect is. I know what Keeley is as a junior. I've only seen Scott as a sophomore, so it's a little bit of a different deal.
Obviously, so people understand, Ryan was not at Irish Breakdown when Keon committed. He was still doing something else. So when you jumped in, it was this January, and Keon was already committed.
Yep.
My first look at Keon was when he committed in last June, which meant the film we were looking at was, like Justin, the sophomore film. But what I'm saying is you could see then that Keon had the elite ceiling. You could see it then. But you also saw a kid that was super skinny, that had he needed to get a lot bigger, and you could see that he was athletic, but he didn't quite. What it looked like to me, Ryan, he was that kid that had just hit a growth spurt, and he was still you see it in basketball even more, and he's like still trying to figure out how to always put the coordination together to do that. That's what happened when he was a junior. If you go back and look at pictures of him when he was a sophomore and now as a junior heading into a senior year, he's blown up, right? He now looks like he's ready to go to college and be a baller. You would not have thought that he was going to help as a freshman when they first got him. You thought this kid's but the ceiling was always there. It's always there. You should go back and watch his sophomore film. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that.
I'm definitely going to do that. But the only Keon Keeley I know is the 6'6", 240-pound version.
That's not the one that committed to Notre Dame. He was like 220, 225 when he committed, and that was bigger than what he was as a sophomore in the fall. Because remember, this was June of his going into his junior year. Yep. But the upside was always there. It was always there. God Country Notre Dame Barbecue Thank you for the super chat very, very much. Super excited. I'm leaving to go camping all week. No Wi-Fi, no cell phones, which means no IB. I expect commit videos on Novosad, Love, Osborne, and Hannafin when I get back. Have a great week, IB. Well, you're going to need to be gone for a while because Jaden Osbury doesn't commit for another 9 days. And so he doesn't commit to August 4th. And I don't know that all those guys have commits scheduled for the next week. I don't think any of them do, actually. So hopefully we won't disappoint you, but I couldn't do that, Ryan. I could not be gone for a week without access to internet.
I couldn't either. I mean, for your job, right? Like literally you couldn't for the job, but yeah. I'll God Country Notre Dame Barbecue. I'll give all those guys a call and be like, hey, we need you to commit today.
Yes. Right? And we got a guy that's camping that needs us to all get some stuff done here before he gets back. So can you guys help us out, please? Would really appreciate that. Would really appreciate that. All right. Let's get to some more here. All right. I can't. Somebody just my buddy Jason just said that Orlando Pace is overrated in college.
Jesus!
Really bad take. That's almost as bad of a take as saying you could have sacked me in high school. But no, that's actually a worse take. It's actually a worse take. Archer asks, looking into the future, which position group do you feel best about over the next 4 years, and which position group concerns you the most?
I mean, linebacker has to be the one that you feel best about, right? With how they're committed, how they're recruiting over the last 2 years.
I'm still going defensive line.
You think so?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Just because I think you can make it. First of all, I think the fact is we can have a conversation about several position groups, which is where you want to be. I could argue tight end. I could argue offensive line. I love what they're doing at corner. I mean, I think it's not getting talked about enough of how good the last couple of classes have been at cornerback. Reason I'd go D line is because you're not like the 2022 linebacker class. To me, says like they were overcoming some of the issues that were there before because of short on numbers.
Okay.
Right. Where D line is building on top of a group that was already pretty good. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's why I'd still go D line. I'd still go D line ahead. So
what concerns you the most? Mine's pretty easy. Specialists. I mean, like I don't know what's in the kickers, punters. Moving forward. I know Bryce McPherson was a nice punting prospect, but I don't know. We'll see moving forward.
Yep. I say let's do position group. What position group are you, to me, like most concerned about, like of actual players?
Are we calling kickers not players?
No, position players. Position players.
I'm just messing with you. It's a good question. I mean, I don't have like anything that's overly concerning, to be honest. I guess wide receiver, I guess, right? Just like the numbers to continue to get to those numbers, I guess. But like even there, I like the talent that they're bringing in. So that one's a little tough. I guess I would defer to wide receiver just because of the numbers issues, though.
Okay. Yeah, I'm trying to think. I would. Man, that's a tough one. I'd say quarterback.
Huh.
Yeah, because here's the thing. Right now, they don't have a quarterback committed in 2023. I'm not super high on Steve Angeli. What if CJ Carr gets hurt? Right? I mean, like, to me, there's a difference. Whereas, like, if Jadarian Price were to not pan out or get hurt, you'd still have Jabron Payne. You still have Jaden Lamar, potentially Jeremiah Love. You know what I mean? Like, those type of things. So, to me, I'd say quarterback is still, because the depth is still a problem. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes complete sense. I guess it would ease your concern a lot if Notre Dame does get a pretty good 2023 quarterback. Then you're going to feel like there's an insurance, I guess, to that pick at that point. Yeah. But yeah.
Yep. So, all right, we have a super chat here from Sean Michael. Thanks as always, guys. I just had to show some love to Dane Chris. So underrated. He could throw it 45 yards in a rope. Wish injuries didn't get him. I don't think his issues were only injury related. I think Dane had a couple other issues. He had a very long release, which could create some bouts of inaccuracy. And I just don't think he handled adversity on the field super well. always got to be careful when you say that because people they get a little sensitive about. I'm not talking about life. Some people he didn't handle adversity on the field extremely well, and he obviously wasn't coached worth a crap by Charlie Molinar. But he had a bazooka for an arm. I mean, there wasn't a Notre Dame quarterback that threw the ball harder or farther that I know of than Dane Christ. I mean, he had an absolute rocket for an arm. I mean, I remember the touchdown pass against Michigan in 2010. It's like the Michigan guy really thought he had the read on that, and that ball to Kyle Rudolph that went for like a 95-yard touchdown. He really thought he had a read on that thing, and it just kept going and going and going and going. But yeah, and I also think Dane gets too much of the blame for the 2010 season. I think Kelly gave him too much of the blame, to be honest with you. I don't think they necessarily had an offense that was geared towards Dane, which, whatever, you're trying to instill an offense. But, I mean, it's like the Michigan game. People forget. Notre Dame had a lead when Dane got hurt, and then the lead was gone when he came back. But to me, I just felt like and I think because Tommy Rees went on the run that he went on to go 4-0, that just shows that Dane wasn't that good. Well, that's assuming that Dane was the reason that you lost those games, and I never felt that he was, but how Kelly, but that's kind of where it was with Kelly. He was always going to blame somebody for the shortcomings. We just didn't know he was that guy yet. You know what I mean? Like, we didn't know Kelly was that let's blame somebody type of thing. And going into 2011, it was just one of those things where Kelly was just waiting on him to make a mistake, and when he did, he was gonna, falter or move on to the next guy.
As far as pure arm strength, Brian, who else would be in the conversation for you as far as
Wimbush and Everett Golson for sure? Malik had a rocket. Malik would probably be next.
Would he?
Yeah, Malik had I'll tell you what. Do you remember the throw he made against Virginia? The long touchdown to Will Fuller.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not going to find a much further pass than that. I mean, it was an absolute rocket. I mean, they've had some guys with really strong arms. I mean, here just pure arm strength. Deshaun Kaiser is probably not in the top 5 of Notre Dame quarterbacks since Brian Kelly arrived. And if we're just going to talk just pure arm strength, I mean, Andrew Hendricks is in that conversation. He had a very strong arm and no clue where it was going to go.
Hendricks had a rifle.
Yes,
who was the kid that was on the roster a couple years ago? The backup. He had a cannon for an arm too.
You talking about Phil Dracovic?
No.
Bro, Brandon Clark. Yes,
Clark had a cannon.
Yes,
yeah.
He had a strong. Now again, you had no clue where it was going to go. They've had some kids the last couple years, Ryan, that had very, very strong arms. It's just. There was a lot of issues with Notre Dame in quarterback development that didn't have a lot to do with the lack of talent at the position. I've said this a million times. It was not always about talent. That was not always the reason Notre Dame struggled. They had some. I mean, if there was look, put it like this: Deshaun Kaiser, a second-round NFL draft pick, was on a roster where he had at best the third arm, at best the third strongest arm. Because remember, there in 2016, Notre Dame had Malik, Deshaun, and Brandon Wimbush all on the same team.
Mm-hmm.
And and then 2013, you could argue, okay, who had the better arm, Malik or Everett? 2014 as well. I mean, it's a legitimate conversation because Everett had a very strong arm as well. I don't think it was as strong as Malik's. I mean, Malik had an absolute rifle. Now, again, like we said, did he always know where it was going to go? Was he always going to be accurate? No, but Malik could launch the football. I'm trying to find the touchdown pass he had to Will Fuller because I'm genuinely curious to see how far that ball went in the air. He threw it from the 33. Let's see here. Threw from the 33 far hash, and Will Fuller caught it at the 7. So that's a 43-17. That's a 60-yard pass that he threw from the far hash outside the far numbers. And think about, I mean, was it 17 plus 4? That's a 60-yard pass that he threw in, covered 60 yards vertically, but he threw it from the far hash, right? So, I mean,
that's probably a 60. That's probably a 65, 70 yard throw.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that is a bomb, an absolute bomb. But yeah, they've had some cannons. It just, Just never developed. And that's why I always laugh when I hear people talk about, well, Notre Dame just hasn't had the talent to, at quarterback. I'm like, come on, man.
Well, even when Ian Book was coming out, people were like, "Oh, he just doesn't have a great arm," and blah blah. I'm like, that's not Ian Book's problem. Ian Book has a strong arm. Like it's not an issue of arm strength with Ian Book.
Right. Yeah. And now again, was Ian in the same category as those other guys? No.
But it was still good arm strength. Yeah.
Right. But I mean, who would be your top 5? I mean, to me, it's Dane, Malik, Everett. Just arm strength. Brandon, just power, just sheer arm power.
Are we just doing the Kelly era though?
Yes.
So we're not including like Brady Quinn in that conversation.
Yeah, but Brady didn't have a real super strong arm. He didn't have a cannon for an arm.
I don't even know who my top 5 would be. I'd have to think about that.
Go back and watch some film of Brady. He didn't have a bazooka. He had a good arm, but it wasn't like a cannon arm. I'd go Dane, Malik, Everett. Who were Brandon Wimbush? Man.
Yeah, Wimbush had a cannon too. Yep.
Like the fact that I'm not even going to put Jerkovic in there is like, he
doesn't have a strong arm. Just ask Twitter.
Yeah.
So.
Don't even get me started on that. It'd probably either be just the Kelly era. It'd probably either be Brendan Clark or Andrew Hendricks. Just pure arm strength, would probably be my 5, but yeah, I mean, who'd I say would be number 1? Dane probably be number 1. Just power. I'd say Malik's probably 2. Brandon to be 3. I'd go Brendan Clark 4, and then Ev 5. Just pure power. Just power. Now, Everett, I would argue, had more arm talent than all of them, but just power. Just because Everett could throw it as far as any of them, but I thought those guys got a little bit more on the 25-yard in cut. You know what I mean? Would be the difference. So it's a really impressive group. Really impressive group. All right, let's see here. Here's one for you, Ryan. Are there any similarities between Jeremiah Love's game and Ricky Waters' game?
See, all right. So I remember Ricky Waters when he was with the Eagles. That was like my most memory. I don't really remember him too much. I've seen highlights of him at Notre Dame, but I'll say I think that Ricky had a little more shake to him, but I think that Love has a little more vertical speed. Is that fair in that regard? And then, I mean, Ricky was obviously I think that both players obviously have some skills in the passing game, but I mean, Ricky Waters was a really good all-purpose back, especially in the NFL. So I'd say Ricky with a little more shake comparative to Love that maybe has a little more of explosiveness, if that makes sense.
Yep. Mark Bosing in college, who y'all got? Tom Zibikowski or Harrison Smith? Zibby here. I don't even want to answer this question because the people that are loyal to Zibby are like people who are like fans of like politicians or actors where it doesn't matter what stupid thing they say or do, they're still going to support that person. Like I think Zibby was a great kid and a warrior, but he was also a really undisciplined player that would give up big plays. All around player, it's no question. It's Zibikowski because he could return punts and do all that stuff. But as far as just when Harrison finally moved to safety, he was a better safety than Tommy Zibikowski was. Just was.
It's fair.
Now when he was a linebacker, it was equally not close in Zibikowski's favor. But I'm sorry, Harrison Smith's last 2 years at Notre Dame were better than anything that Tom Zibikowski ever did from a snap after snap after snap basis. What created Zibikowski's legend was couple things. Number one, loved Notre Dame, right? And you could just see it. You could see his love for Notre Dame just coming out of his pores. Number two, Zibby was a playmaker. Like he was a clutch dude. You could burn him 3 times in the middle of the game, but if there was a chance to make a game-saving or game-winning play at the end, you felt like he was going to make it. And that has caused some people to forget all the times we saw number 9 chasing someone into the end zone, right? I mean, that happened way too much for a great player. And that was sort of the knock on Zibikowski, if I'm being honest and objective. But you cannot discount that kid was at his best in big moments. he was a clutch money player at Notre Dame. There's no even like the fumble return against Ohio State that got turned down, which shouldn't have been overturned in my opinion. It just seemed like he was always going to do something like that. You know what I mean? And whether it was on defense or as a punt returner. But as far as just if I could take either one of those two safeties, it's not even discussion for me. I'm taking Harrison Smith if based on what he was his last 2 years at Notre Dame.
That's fair. Yeah. I mean, I subscribe to Harrison Smith, the better safety. Tom Zbikowski was the fan favorite. Like my heart says Tom Zbikowski, my mind says Harrison Smith. And to your point, Brian, I feel like I could always count on Zbikowski to make a play. Like I always felt like that, man. Like whether it was a punt return or it was a turnover or a big tackle, like I always just felt like he was going to get the job done. Just always felt that way.
Yeah. Now the problem is there were times you were down 3 touchdowns because him and the rest of the secondary were, got you behind, and that's what not enough people remember about that.
It's fair.
Yes. So, but yeah, he was a really good kid. Got a chance to meet him when he was in high school at the Bowling Green camp. So, really, really nice kid.
He's got to be one of the toughest players that Notre Dame has had too. I mean,
he was not big at all. He was small.
No. Yeah.
Like if you ever were next to Tom, and I mean small as compared to football players. I mean, he can still kick my butt. I'm just talking about compared to guys he was going against. But he was not a real big guy, but he played big, and I think what's funny is I'll say this: if Tom Zbikowski was playing today, where I'd play him? He would not be a safety for me.
Rover?
He's my starting rover.
Yeah.
Because then he doesn't have to have the same coverage response. Because his problem was he was always wanting to come downhill. He would have been great in Zeke Mata's role in 2012. He might have been an All-American playing that role. They just tried to they kept putting him in coverage, and it's like, why are you putting him in that situation? Why are you asking him to do that? That was as much of a coaching problem as it was a Zibby problem, in my opinion. You knew who he was. Why are you asking him to do that?
Right.
Just never made any sense. Last 2 questions. Corey Flynn asks, when do we see and read your Marcus Freeman interview? You mentioned you conducted a few weeks back. Corey, thank you for the super chat. Part of it is already out. Corey, we actually I did write one article about that. The other part will be part of the football preview, which I'm still working on. So that's kind of a solo thing right now that I'm working on. So we're going to try to get that done. I'm hoping that will be done before the season starts. And that will be something that I think my thing now is only going to be open to Irish Breakdown subscribers. So I will put that interview up after that at some point in time on the site. But for now, it is something that is going to be in mostly. And now I got a couple features from that will have quotes from it. But as far as in the Q&A form, it's going to go into the football preview magazine. And then last question. Here's an interesting for you from Sean Kane, Ryan. We'll wrap up on this one. Who has the higher ceiling, Gabriel Rubio or Jason Onye?
It would be Onye for me because I think that Onye is just a little more of a gifted athlete and he's still growing into his frame. But I think Gabriel Rubio has a pretty significantly higher floor, right? I think that you can depend on him. It's just I think Jason Onye can be a playmaking nose, while I think Gabriel Rubio could be a really solid run-stopping defensive tackle. But I don't think he's going to give you as much from a penetration perspective as a Jason Onye.
Right. I would agree with that. I think that's fair. I definitely agree on the ceiling versus floor part. There's no doubt about that. I think Jason Onye has a very high ceiling. Very high ceiling, in my opinion. Somebody asked the last time Notre Dame had a punt return for a touchdown. Last time Notre Dame had a punt return for a touchdown was C.J. Sanders in 2015. So that is the last time they had a punt return for a touchdown. Yes, 2015. Anyway, that's going to do it for today. For today's show. Appreciate everybody being with us. Sorry about the technical difficulties. I have no clue why StreamYards all of a sudden wasn't allowing me to share that, but it is what it is. But appreciate your patience, some of you's patience today. But we'll be back to tonight, 6 o'clock tonight. Now, scheduling note. So Sean Stiers is on vacation this week, but that does not mean that there is no IB Nation Sports Talk. Vince will be hosting that all week, so you will not see Vince in our afternoon show this week, because Vince is going to be hosting IB Nation Sports Talk. You won't see Vince on this show until Friday's mailbag. But so he'll be hosting at 6 p.m. Eastern tonight. He is going to have Tom Noy from the South Bend Tribune. Indy Insider will be on with him tonight. They're going to talk Notre Dame basketball and some other topics. Because if you know Tom's pretty versed on all different sports at Notre Dame. So they will definitely talk some basketball because Notre Dame has started. They've already kind of started their summer workouts and for basketball. So I'm sure that JJ Starling's name will come up tonight. He so supposedly is looking great so far in camp. So he's gonna be a monster. I think Notre Dame's first McDonald's All-American in a while. So they're gonna talk about him, but they'll talk about a lot of other things. So that will be. So make sure you tune in tonight, 6 p.m. Eastern for the IB Nation Sports Talk. Vince will be hosting that all week while Sean is out, and we'll get the rest of it. Rest of our summer schedule here figured out, but we're gonna have a lot of team stuff coming up this week. Ryan and I will be doing the 1 p.m. hour, a couple hours, and then Vince will be hosting the show at night. Mace AK hit it perfectly, everybody. Join the message board, hit the like button, hit the subscribe to the channel, and please subscribe to our new CFB Nation show that we have as well. Hit the notification bell, share this podcast, leave a 5-star review. Visit the IB store for some Gap Closers merch like Ryan has on. Ryan, show the Gap Closers. And as always, go Irish. Thanks, everybody, for being with us tonight or today. We will talk to you all. We'll see all of you hopefully again tonight at 6 o'clock for Vince's IB Nation Sports Talk show. And the rest of you we will see tomorrow. Thanks for joining the Breakdown Podcast.